Chubby brunette Eunice Kinnison sat in a rocker, reading the Sunday papers and listening to her radio. Her husband, Ralph, lay sprawled upon the davenport, smoking a cigarette and reading the current issue of Extraordinary Stories against the unheard background of music. Mentally, he was far from Tellus, flitting in his super-dreadnought through parsec after parsec of vacuous space. The music broke off without warning, and there blared out an announcement which yanked Ralph Kinnison back to earth with a violence almost physical. He jumped up, jammed his hands into his pockets. "Pearl Harbor?" he blurted. How could they have let them get that far?" "But Frank," the woman gasped. She had not worried much about her husband, but Frank, her son. "He'll have to go." Her voice died away. "Not a chance in the world." Kinnison did not speak to soothe, but as though from sheer knowledge. "Designing engineer for Lockwood? He'll want to, all right, but everyone who was ever even exposed to a course in aeronautical engineering will sit this war out." "But they say it can't last very long. It can't, can it?" "I'll say it can. Loose talk. 5 years minimum is my guess. Not that my guess is any better than anybody else's." He prowled around the room. His somber expression did not lighten. "I knew it," the woman said at last. "You too, even after the last one. You haven't said anything, so I thought perhaps—" "I know I didn't. There was always the chance that we wouldn't get drawn into it. If you say so, though, I'll stay home." "Am I apt to? I let you go when you were really in danger." "What do you mean by that crack?" he interrupted. "Regulations. 1 year too old. Thank heaven." "So what? They'll need technical experts bad. They'll make exceptions." "Possibly. Desk jobs. Desk officers don't get killed in action, or even wounded. Why, perhaps with children all grown up and married, we won't even have to be separated." "Another angle, financial." "Pooh, who cares about that? Besides, for a man out of a job—" "From you, I'll let that one pass. Thanks, Eunie, you're an ace. I'll shoot him a wire." The telegram was sent. The Kinnisons waited and waited, until about the middle of January, beautifully phrased and beautifully mimeographed letters began to arrive.
"The War Department recognizes the value of your previous military experience and appreciates your willingness once again to take up arms in defense of the country. Veteran Officers Questionnaire. Please fill out completely. Form 191A, Form 170 in duplicate, Form 315. Impossible to forecast the extent to which the War Department may ultimately utilize the services which you and thousands of others have so generously offered. Form not to be construed as meaning that you have been permanently rejected. Form advise you that while at the present the War Department is unable to use you—"
"Wouldn't that fry you to a crisp?" Kinnison demanded. "What in hell have they got in their heads? Sawdust? They think that because I'm 51 years old, I've got one foot in the grave. I'll bet $4 that I'm in better shape than that cursed Major General and his whole damn staff." "I don't doubt it, dear." Eunice's smile was, however, mostly of relief. "But here's an ad. It's been running for a week." "Chemical engineers, shell-loading plant, within 75 miles of Townville, over 5 years' experience, organic chemistry, technology, explosives." "They want you," Eunice declared soberly. "Well, I'm a Ph.D. in organic. I've had more than 5 years' experience in both organic chemistry and technology. If I don't know something about explosives, I did a smart job of fooling Dean Montrose back at Goswami University. I'll write him a letter." He wrote. He filled out a form. The telephone rang. "Kinnison speaking. Yes, Dr. Sumner? Oh, yes, chief chemist. That's it. 1 year over age, so I thought—" "Oh, that's a minor matter. We won't starve. If you can't pay 150, I'll come for 100 or 75 or 50. That's all right, too. I'm well enough known in my own field so that the title of junior chemical engineer won't hurt me a bit." "Okay, I'll see you about 1 o'clock. Stoner and Black Incorporated. Operators. Entwistle Ordnance Plant, Entwistle, Missakota. What? Well, maybe I could at that. Goodbye." He turned to his wife. "You know what? They want me to come down right away and go to work. Hot dog! Am I glad that I told that louse Hendricks exactly where he could stick that job of mine. He must have known that you wouldn't sign a straight salary contract after getting a share of the profits so long. Maybe he believed what you always say just before or just after kicking somebody's teeth down their throats, that you're so meek and mild, a regular milquetoast. Do you really think that they'll want you back after the war?" It was clear that Eunice was somewhat concerned concerning Kinnison's joblessness, but Kinnison was not. "Probably. That's the gossip. And I'll come back when hell freezes over." His square jaw tightened. "I've heard of outfits stupid enough to let their technical brains go because they could sell, for a while, anything they produced, but I didn't know that I was working for one. Maybe I'm not exactly a timid soul, but you'll have to admit that I never kicked anybody's teeth out unless they tried to kick mine out first." Entwistle Ordnance Plant covered 20-odd square miles of more or less level land. 99% of its area was inside the fence. Most of the buildings within that restricted area, while in reality enormous, were dwarfed by the vast spaces separating them, for safety distances are not small when TNT and tetrol by the ton are involved. Those structures were built of concrete, steel, glass, transite, and tile. Outside the fence was different. This was the administration area. Its buildings were tremendous wooden barracks, relatively close together, packed with the executive, clerical, and professional personnel appropriate to an organization employing over 20,000 men and women. Well inside the fence, but a safety distance short of the one line, loading line number 1, was a long, low building, quite inadequately named the Chemical Laboratory. Inadequately, in that the chief chemist, a highly capable, if more than a little cantankerous, explosives engineer, had already gathered into his chemical section most of development, most of engineering, and all of physics, weights and measures, and weather. One room of the chemical laboratory, in the corner most distant from administration, was separated from the rest of the building by a 16-inch wall of concrete and steel, extending from foundation to roof, without a door, window, or other opening. This was the laboratory of the chemical engineers, the boys who played with explosives high and low. Any explosion occurring therein could not affect the chemical laboratory proper or its personnel. Entwistle's main roads were paved, but in February of 1942 such minor items as sidewalks existed only on the blueprints. Entwistle's soil contained much clay, and at that time the mud was approximately 6 inches deep. Hence, since there were neither inside doors nor sidewalks, it was only natural that the technologists did not visit at all frequently the polished tile cleanliness of the laboratory. It was also natural enough for the far larger group to refer to the segregated ones as exiles and outcasts, and that some witty chemist applied to that isolated place the name Siberia. The name stuck. More, the engineers seized it and acclaimed it. They were Siberians and proud of it. And Siberians they remained long after Entwistle's mud turned into dust, and within the year the Siberians were to become well and favorably known in every ordnance plant in the country, to many high executives who had no idea of how the name originated. Kinnison became a Siberian as enthusiastically as the youngest man there. The term youngest is used in its exact sense, for not one of them was a recent graduate. Each had had at least 5 years of responsible experience, and Cappy Sumner kept on building. He hired extravagantly and fired ruthlessly, to the minds of some senselessly, but he knew what he was doing. He knew explosives, and he knew men. He was not liked, but he was respected. His building was good. Being one of the only 2 old men there, and the other did not stay long, Kinnison, as a junior chemical engineer, was not at first accepted without reserve. Apparently he did not notice that fact, but went quietly about his assigned duties. He was meticulously careful with, but very evidently not in any fear of, the materials with which he worked. He pelleted and tested tracer, igniter, and incendiary compositions. He took his turn at burning out rejects. Whenever asked, he went out on the lines with any one of them. His experimental tetrals always mic'd to size. His TNT melt pours, introductory to loading 40 mm on the 3-line, came out solid, free from checks and cavitations. It became evident to those young but keen minds that he, alone of them all, was on familiar ground. They began to discuss their problems with him. Out of his years of technological experience, and by bringing everyone present into the discussion, he either helped them directly or helped them to help themselves. His stature grew. Black-haired, black-eyed Tug Tugwell, 200 pounds of ex-football player in charge of Tracer on 7-line, called him Uncle Ralph, and the habit spread. And in a couple of weeks, at about the same time that Injun Abernathy was slightly injured by being blown through a door by a minor explosion of his igniter on the 8th line, he was promoted to full chemical engineer, a promotion which went unnoticed since it involved only changes in title and salary. 3 weeks later, however, he was made senior chemical engineer in charge of melt pour. At this there was a celebration led by Blondie Wanacek, a sulfuric acid expert handling tetrol on the 2. Kinnison searched minutely for signs of jealousy or antagonism, but could find none. He went blithely to work on the 6th line, where they wanted to start pouring 20-pound fragmentation bombs, ably assisted by Tug and by 2 new men. One of these was Doc, or Bart Barton, who, the grapevine said, had been hired by Cappy to be his assistant. His motto, like that of Rikki Tikki Tavi, was to run and find out, and he did so with glee and abandon. He was a good egg. So was the other newcomer, Charlie Charlevoix, a prematurely gray paint and lacquer expert who had also made the Siberian grade. A few months later, Sumner called Kinnison into the office. The latter went, wondering what the old hardshell was going to cry about now, for to be called into that office meant only one thing, censure. "Kinnison, I like your work," the chief chemist began gruffly, and Kinnison's mouth almost dropped open. "Anybody who ever got a Ph.D. under Montrose would have to know explosives, and the FBI report on you showed that you had brains, ability, and guts. But none of that explains how you can get along so well with those damned Siberians. I want to make you assistant chief and put you in charge of Siberia. Formally, I mean. Actually, you have been for months." "Why, no, I didn't. Besides, how about Barton? He's too good a man to kick in the teeth that way." Admitted. This did surprise Kinnison. He had never thought that the irascible and tempestuous chief would ever confess to a mistake. This was a Cappy he had never known. "I discussed it with him yesterday. He's a damned good man, but it's decidedly questionable whether he has got whatever it is that made Tugwell, Wanacek, and Charlevoix work straight through for 72 hours, napping now and then on benches and grabbing coffee and sandwiches when they could, until they got that frag bomb straightened out." Sumner did not mention the fact that Kinnison had worked straight through, too. That was taken for granted. "Well, I don't know." Kinnison's head was spinning. "I'd like to check with Barton first, okay?" "I expected that. Okay." Kinnison found Barton and led him out behind the testing shed. "Bart, Cappy tells me that he figures on kicking you in the face by making me assistant, and that you'd okayed it. One word, and I'll tell the old buzzard just where to stick the job and exactly where to go to do it." "Reaction perfect. Yield 100%. Barton stuck out his hand. "Otherwise, I would tell him all that myself, and more. As it is, Uncle Ralph, smooth out the ruffled plumage. They go to hell for you, wading in standing straight up. They might do the same with me in the driver's seat, and they might not. Why take a chance? You're it. Some things about the deal I don't like, of course, but at that it makes me about the only man working for Stoner and Black who can get a release any time a good permanent job breaks. I'll stick until then, okay?" It was unnecessary for Barton to add that as long as he was there, he would really work. "I'll say it's okay," and Kinnison reported to Sumner. "All right, Chief, I'll try it, if you can square it with the Siberians." "That will not be too difficult." Nor was it. The Siberians' reaction brought a lump to Kinnison's throat. "Ralph the First, Tsar of Siberia!" they yelled. "Long live the Tsar! Kowtow, serfs and vassals, to Tsar Ralph the First!" Kinnison was still glowing when he got home that night, to the Government House project and to the 3-room mansionette in which he and Eunice lived. He would never forget the events of that day. What a gang! What a gang! But listen, Ace, they work under their own power. You couldn't keep those kids from working. Why should I get the credit for what they do? I haven't the foggiest. Eunice wrinkled her forehead and her nose, but the corners of her mouth quirked up. "Are you quite sure that you haven't had anything to do with it? But supper is ready. Let's eat." More months passed. Work went on. Absorbing work and highly varied, the details of which are of no importance here. Paul Jones, a big, hard, top-drawer chicle technologist, set up the 4-line to pour demolition blocks. Frederick Hinton came in, qualified as a Siberian, and went to work on anti-personnel mines. Kinnison was promoted again to chief chemist. He and Sumner had never been friendly. He made no effort to find out why Cappy had quit or had been terminated, whichever it was. This promotion made no difference. Barton, now assistant, ran the whole chemical section, save for one unit, Siberia, and did a superlative job. The chief chemist's secretary worked for Barton, not for Kinnison. Kinnison was the czar of Siberia. The anti-personnel mines had been giving trouble. Too many men were being killed by prematures, and nobody could find out why. The problem was handed to Siberia. Hinton tackled it, missed, and called for help. The Siberians rallied round. Kinnison loaded and tested mines, so did Paul and Tug and Blondie. Kinnison was testing out in the firing area when he was called to administration to attend a staff meeting. Hinton relieved him. He had not reached the gate, however, when a guard car flagged him down. "Sorry, sir, but there's been an accident at Pit 5, and you are needed out there." "Accident? Fred Hinton, is he—" "I'm afraid so, sir." It is a harrowing thing to have to help gather up what fragments can be found of one of your best friends. Kinnison was white and sick as he got back to the firing station, just in time to hear the chief safety officer say, "Must have been carelessness, rank carelessness. I warned this man Hinton myself on one occasion." "Carelessness, hell!" Kinnison blazed. "You had the guts to warn me once, too, and I've forgotten more about safety and explosives than you will ever know. Fred Hinton was not careless. If I hadn't been called in, that would have been me." "What is it, then?" "I don't know, yet. I'll tell you now, though, Major Moulton, that I will know, and the minute I find out, I'll talk to you again." He went back to Siberia, where he found Tug and Paul, faces still tear-streaked, staring at something that looked like a small piece of wire. "This is it, Uncle Ralph," Tug said brokenly. "Don't see how it could be, but it is." "What is it?" Kinnison demanded. "Firing pin, brittle. When you pull the safety, the force of the spring must break it off at this constricted section here." "But, damn it, Tug, it doesn't make sense. It's tension. But wait, there'd be some horizontal component at that, but they'd have to be brittle as glass." "I know it. It doesn't seem to make much sense. But we were there, you know, and I assembled every one of those goddamn mines myself. Nothing else could possibly have made that mine go off just when it did." "Okay, Tug, we'll test him. Call in Bart. He can have the scale lab boys rig us up a gadget. By the time we can get some more of those pins in off the line." They tested 100 under the normal tension of the spring, and 3 of them broke. They tested another 100. 5 broke. They stared at each other. "That's it," Kinnison declared, "but this will stink to high heaven. Have inspection break out a new lot, and we'll test 1,000. Of that 1,000 pins, 32 broke. Bart, will you dictate a 1-page preliminary report to Vera and rush it over to Building 1 as fast as you can? I'll go over and tell Moulton a few things." Major Moulton was, as usual, in conference, but Kinnison was in no mood to wait. "Tell him," he instructed the Major's private secretary, who had barred his way, "that either he will talk to me right now, or I will call the district safety over his head. I'll give him 60 seconds to decide which." Moulton decided to see him. "I'm very busy, Dr. Kinnison, but I don't give a swivel-eyed tinker's damn how busy you are. I told you that the minute I found out what was the matter with the M2 mine, I'd talk to you again. Here I am. Brittle firing pins. 3 2/10% defective. So I'm very irregular, Doctor. The matter will have to go through channels. Not this one. The formal report is going through channels, but as I started to tell you, this is an emergency report to you as Chief of Safety. Since the defect is not covered by specs, neither process nor ordnance can reject except by test, and whoever does the testing will very probably be killed. Therefore, as every employee of Stoner and Black is not only authorized but positively instructed to do upon discovering an unsafe condition, I am reporting it directly to safety. Since my whiskers are a trifle longer than an operator's, I am reporting it directly to the head of the safety division, and I am telling you that if you don't do something about it damned quick, stop production and slap a hold order on all the M2APs you can reach, I'll call district and make you personally responsible for every premature that occurs from now on. Since any safety man anywhere would much rather stop a process than authorize one, and since this particular safety man loved to throw his weight around, Kinnison was surprised that Moulton did not act instantly. The fact that he did not so act should have, but did not, give the naive Kinnison much information as to conditions existing outside the fence.
But they need those mines very badly.
They are an item of very heavy production.
If we stop them, how long? Have you any suggestions?
Yes. Call district and have them rush through a change of spec, including heat treat and a modified Charpy test. In the meantime, we can get back into full production tomorrow, if you have district slap 100% inspection upon those pens.
Excellent. We can do that. Very fine work, Doctor. Miss Morgan, get district at once.
This, too, should have warned Kinnison, but it did not. He went back to the laboratory. Tempus fugited. Orders came to get ready to load M67HE, AT, 105mm high-explosive armor-tearing, shell on the 9, and the Siberians went joyously to work upon the new load. The explosive was to be a mixture of TNT and a polysyllabic compound, everything about which was highly confidential and restricted. "But what the hell's so hush-hush about that stuff?" demanded Blondie, who, with 5 or 6 others, was crowding around the Tsar's desk. Unlike the days of Cappy Sumner, the private office of the chief chemist was now as much Siberia as Siberia itself. "The Germans developed it originally, didn't they?" "Yes, and the Italians used it against the Ethiopians, which was why their bombs were so effective. But it says hush-hush, so that's the way it will be. And if you talk in your sleep, Blondie, tell Betty not to listen." The Siberians worked. The M67 was put into production. It was such a success that orders for it came in faster than they could be filled. Production was speeded up. Small cavitations began to appear, nothing serious, since they passed inspection. Nevertheless, Kinnison protested in a formal report, receipt of which was formally acknowledged. General Somebody or other, Entwistle's commanding officer, whom none of the Siberians had ever met, was transferred to more active duty, and a Colonel Snodgrass or some such name took his place. Ordnance got a new chief inspector. An M67 Entwistle loaded, prematured in a gun barrel, killing 27 men. Kinnison protested again, verbally this time at a staff meeting. He was assured, verbally, that a formal and thorough investigation was being made. Later he was informed, verbally and without witnesses, that the investigation had been completed and that the loading was not at fault. A new commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Franklin, appeared. The Siberians, too busy to do more than glance at newspapers, paid very little attention to a glider crash in which several notables were killed. They heard that an investigation was being made, but even the Tsar did not know until later that Washington had, for once, acted fast in correcting a bad situation. That inspection, which had been under production, was summarily divorced therefrom. And gossip spread abroad that Stillman, then head of the inspection division, was not a big enough man for the job. Thus it was an entirely unsuspecting Kinnison who was called into the innermost private office of Thomas Keller, the superintendent of production. "Kinnison, how in hell do you handle those Siberians? I never saw anything like them before in my life." "No, and you never will again. Nothing on earth except a war could get them together or hold them together. I don't handle them. They can't be handled. I give them a job to do and let them do it. I back them up, that's all." "Huh," Keller grunted. "That's a hell of a formula. If I want anything done right, I've got to do it myself. But whatever your system is, it works. But what I wanted to talk to you about is, how'd you like to be head of the inspection division, which would be enlarged to include your present chemical section?" "Huh?" Kinnison demanded, dumbfounded. "At a salary well up on the confidential scale." Keller wrote a figure upon a piece of paper, showed it to his visitor, then burned it in an ashtray. Kinnison whistled. "I'd like it, for more reasons than that. But I didn't know that you... Or have you already checked with the General and Mr. Black?" "Naturally," came the smooth reply. "In fact, I suggested it to them and have their approval. Perhaps you are curious to know why?" "I certainly am." "For two reasons. First, because you have developed a crew of technical experts that is the envy of every technical man in the country. Second, you and your Siberians have done every job I ever asked you to, and done it fast. As a division head, you will no longer be under me, but I am right, I think, in assuming that you will work with me just as effectively as you do now." "I can't think of any reason why I wouldn't." This reply was made in all honesty, but later, when he came to understand what Keller had meant, how bitterly Kinnison was to regret its making. He moved into Stillman's office and found there what he thought was ample reason for his predecessor's failure to make good. To his way of thinking, it was tremendously overstaffed, particularly with assistant chief inspectors. Delegation of authority, so widely preached throughout Entwistle's ordnance plant, had not been given even lip service here. Stillman had not made a habit of visiting the lines, nor did the chief line inspectors, the boys who really knew what was going on, ever visit him. They reported to the assistants, who reported to Stillman, who handed down his Jovian pronouncements. Kinnison set out, deliberately this time, to mold his key chief line inspectors into just such a group as the Siberians already were. He released the assistants to more productive work, retaining of Stillman's office staff only a few clerks and his private secretary, one Celeste de St. Aubin, a dynamic, vivacious, at times explosive brunette. He gave the boys on the lines full authority. The few who could not handle the load he replaced with men who could. At first the chief line inspectors simply could not believe. But after the affair of the 40mm, in which Kinnison rammed the decision of his subordinate past Keller, past the general, past Stoner and Black, and clear up to the commanding officer before he made it stick, they were his to a man. Others of his section heads, however, remained aloof. Petler, whose technical section was now part of inspection, and Wilson of gauges were two of those who talked largely and glowingly, but acted obstructively if they acted at all. As weeks went on, Kinnison became wiser and wiser, but made no sign. One day, during a lull, his secretary hung out the "in conference" sign and went into Kinnison's private office. "There isn't a reference to any such investigation anywhere in Central Files." She paused, as if to add something, then turned to leave. "As you were, Celeste. Sit down." "I expected that." "Suppressed, if made at all. You're a smart girl, Celeste, and you know the ropes. You know that you can talk to me, don't you?" "Yes, but this is... well, the word is going around that they are going to break you, just as they have broken every other good man on the reservation." "I expected that, too." The words were quiet enough, but the man's jaw tightened. "Also, I know how they're going to do it." "How?" "The speed up on the 9. They know that I won't stand still for the kind of casts that Keller's new procedure, which goes into effect tonight, is going to produce, and this new CO probably will." Silence fell, broken by the secretary. "General Sanford, our first CO, was a soldier, and a good one," she declared finally. "So was Colonel Snodgrass. Lieutenant Colonel Franklin wasn't, but he was too much of a man to do the dirty work." Dryly. "Exactly. Go on." "And Stoner, the New York half, 95% really of Stoner and Black Incorporated, is a big-time operator. So we get this damned nincompoop of a major who doesn't know a FUSE from FUZE directly from a Wall Street desk." "So what?" One must have heard Ralph Kinnison say those two words to realize how much meaning they can be made to carry. "So what?" the girl blazed, wringing her hands. "Ever since you have been over here, I have been expecting you to blow up, to smash something, in spite of the dozens of times you have told me a fighter cannot slug effectively, Celeste, until he gets both feet firmly planted. When are you going to get your feet planted?" "Never, I'm afraid," he said glumly, as she stared. "So I'll have to start slugging with at least one foot in the air." That startled her. "Explain, please." "I wanted proof. Stuff that I could take to the district, that I could use to tack some hides out flat on a barn door with. Do I get it? I do not. Not a shred. Neither can you. What chance do you think there is of ever getting any real proof?" "Very little," Celeste admitted. "But you can at least smash Petler, Wilson, and that crowd. How I hate those slimy snakes! I wish that you could smash Tom Keller, the poisonous moron." "Not so much moron, although he acts like one at times. As an ignorant puppet with a head swelled 3 sizes too big for his hat. But you can quit yapping about slugging. Fireworks are due to start at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, when Drake is going to reject tonight's run of shell." "Really? But I don't see how either Petler or Wilson come in." "They don't. A fight with those small fry, even smashing them, wouldn't make enough noise." "Keller." "Keller!" Celeste squealed. "But you'll—" "I know. I'll get fired. So what? By tackling him, I can raise enough hell so that the big shots will have to cut out at least some of the rough stuff. You'll probably get fired too, you know. You've been too close to me for your own good." "Not me." She shook her head vigorously. "The minute they terminate you, I quit. Poof, who cares? Besides, I can get a better job in Townville." "Without leaving the project. That's what I figured. It's the boys I'm worried about. I've been getting them ready for this for weeks. But they will quit too. Your Siberians, your inspectors. Of a surety they will quit, every one." "They won't release them. And what Stoner and Black will do to them, even after the war, if they quit without releases, shouldn't be done to a dog. They won't quit either, at least if they don't try to push them around too much. Keller's mouth is watering to get hold of Siberia, but he'll never make it, nor any one of his stooges. I'd better dictate a memorandum to Black on that now, while I'm calm and collected, telling him what he'll have to do to keep my boys from tearing Entwistle apart." "But do you think he will pay any attention to it?" "I'll say he will," Kinnison snorted. "Don't kid yourself about Black, Celeste. He's a smart man. Before this is done, he'll know that he'll have to keep his nose clean." "But how can you do it?" Celeste marveled. "Me, I would urge them on. Few would have the patriotism." "Patriotism? Hell! If that were all, I would have stirred up a revolution long ago. It's for the boys, in years to come. They've got to keep their noses clean, too. Get your notebook, please, and take this down. A rough draft. I'm going to polish it up until it has teeth and claws in every line." And that evening, after supper, he informed Eunice of all the new developments. "Is it still okay with you," he concluded, "for me to get myself fired off this high-salaried job of mine?" "Certainly. Being you, how could you do anything else? Oh, how I wish I could wring their necks." That conversation went on, but additional details are not necessary here. Shortly after 2 o'clock of the following afternoon, Celeste took a call, and listened shamelessly. "Kinnison speaking." "Tug, Uncle Ralph. The cast sectioned just like we thought they would. Dead ringers for Plate D. So Drake hung a red ticket on every tray. Pity was right there, waiting, and started to raise hell. So I chipped in, and he beat it so fast that I looked to see his coat-tail catch fire. Drake didn't quite like to call you, so I did. If Pity keeps on going at the rate he left here, he'll be in Keller's office in nothing flat. Okay, Tug, tell Drake that the shells he rejected are going to stay rejected, and to come in right now with his report. Would you like to come along?" "Would I?" Tugwell hung up. But do you want him here, Doc?" Celeste asked anxiously, without considering whether or not her boss would approve of her eavesdropping. "I certainly do. If I can keep Tug from blowing his top, the rest of the boys will stay in line." A few minutes later, Tugwell strode in, bringing with him Drake, the chief line inspector of the 9 line. Shortly thereafter, the office door was wrenched open. Keller had come to Kinnison, accompanied by the superintendent, whom the Siberians referred to somewhat contemptuously as Pity. "Damn your soul, Kinnison! Come out here! I want to talk to you!" Keller roared, and doors snapped open up and down the long corridor. "Shut up, you goddamn louse!" This from Tugwell, who, black eyes almost emitting sparks, was striding purposefully forward. "I'll sock you so damned hard that—" "Pipe down, Tug. I'll handle this." Kinnison's voice was not loud, but it had then a peculiarly carrying and immensely authoritative quality. Verbally or physically, however he wants to have it. He turned to Keller, who had jumped backward into the hall to avoid the young Siberian. "As for you, Keller, if you had the brains that God gave bastard geese in Ireland, you would have had this conference in private. Since you started it in public, however, I'll finish it in public. How you came to pick me for a yes-man, I'll never know. Just one more measure of your stupidity, I suppose." "Those shells are perfect!" Keller shouted. Tell Drake here to pass them right now. If you don't, by God, I'll—" "Shut up." Kinnison's voice cut. "I'll do the talking. You listen. The spec says, quote, 'shall be free from objectionable cavitation,' unquote. The line inspectors who know their stuff say that those cavitations are objectionable. So do the chemical engineers. Therefore, as far as I am concerned, they are objectionable. Those shells are rejected, and they will stay rejected." "That's what you think," Keller raged. "But there'll be a new head of inspection who will pass them tomorrow morning." "In that you may be half right. When you get through licking Black's boots, tell him I'm in my office." Kinnison re-entered his suite. Keller, swearing, strode away with pity. Doors clicked. "I am going to quit, Uncle Ralph, law or no law," Tugwell stormed. "They'll run that bunch of crap through, and then—" "Will you promise not to quit until they do?" Kinnison asked quietly. "Huh? What?" Tugwell's eyes, and Celeste's, were pools of astonishment. Celeste, being on the inside, understood first. "Oh, to keep his nose clean. I see," she exclaimed. "Exactly. Those shells will not be accepted, nor any like them. On the surface, we got licked. I will get fired. You will find, however, that we won this particular battle. And if you boys stay here and hang together and keep on slugging, you can win a lot more." "Maybe if we raise enough hell, we can make them fire us, too," Drake suggested. "I doubt it. But unless I'm wrong, you can just about write your own ticket from now on, if you play it straight." Kinnison grinned to himself at something which the young men could not see. "You told me what Stoner and Black would do to us," Tugwell said intensely. "What I'm afraid of is that they'll do it to you." "They can't. Not a chance in the world," Kinnison assured him. "You fellows are young, not established. But I'm well known enough in my own field so that if they tried to blackball me, they just get themselves laughed at, and they know it. So beat it back to the 9, you kids, and hang red tickets on everything that doesn't cross-section up to standard. Tell the gang goodbye for me. I'll keep you posted." In less than an hour, Kinnison was called into the office of the President. He was completely at ease. Black was not.
"It has been decided to, ask for your resignation," the President announced at last.
"Save your breath," Kinnison advised. "I came down here to do a job, and the only way you can keep me from doing that job is to fire me."
"That was not entirely unexpected. A difficulty arose, however, in deciding what reason to put on your termination papers."
"I can well believe that. You can put down anything you like," Kinnison shrugged, "with one exception. Any implication of incompetence, and you'll have to prove it in court."
"Incompatibility, say? Okay. Miss Briggs, incompatibility with the highest echelon of Stoner and Black Incorporated, please. You may as well wait, Dr. Kinnison. It will only take a moment."
"Fine. I've got a couple of things to say. First, I know as well as you do that you're between Scylla and Charybdis. Damned if you do and damned if you don't."
"Certainly not. Ridiculous,"
Black blustered, but his eyes wavered.
"Where did you get such a preposterous idea? What do you mean?"
"If you ram those substandard HEAT shells through, you are going to have some more prematures. Not many. The stuff is actually almost good enough. 1 in 10,000, say. Perhaps 1 in 50,000. But you know damned well that you can't afford any. What my Siberians and inspectors know about you and Keller and Pitty and the 9 line would be enough. But to cap the climax, that brainless jackal of yours let the cat completely out of the bag this afternoon, and everyone in Building 1 was listening. One more premature would blow Entwistle wide open, would start something that not all the politicians in Washington could stop. On the other hand, if you scrap those lots and go back to pouring good loads, your Mr. Stoner of New York and Washington will be very unhappy and will scream bloody murder. I'm sure, however, that you won't offer any Plate D loads to Ordnance, in view of the temper of my boys and girls, and the number of people who heard your dumb stooge give you away. You don't dare to. In fact, I told some of my people that you wouldn't, that you were a smart enough operator to keep your nose clean."
"You told them?"
Black shouted in anger and dismay. "Yes, why not?" The words were innocent enough, but Kinnison's expression was full of meaning. "I don't want to seem trite, but you are just beginning to find out that honesty and loyalty are a hell of a hard team to beat. Get out! Take these termination papers and get out!" and Dr. Ralph K. Kinnison, head high, strode out of President Black's office and out of Entwistle Ordnance Plant. End of Chapter 5. Triplanetary, first in the Lensman series by E. Doc Smith, Chapter 6, 1900 and Unknown. Theodore K. Kinnison. A crisp, clear voice snapped from the speaker of an apparently cold, ordinary-looking enough radio-television set. A burly young man caught his breath sharply as he leaped to the instrument and pressed an inconspicuous button. Theodore K. Kinnison acknowledging. The plate remained dark, but he knew that he was being scanned. Operation Bullfinch, the speaker blatted. Kinnison gulped. Operation Bullfinch. Off, he managed to say. Off. He pushed the button again and turned to face the tall, trim honey blonde who stood tensely poised in the archway. Her eyes were wide and protesting, both hands clutched at her throat. Sweets, they're coming. Over the pole, he gritted. 2 hours, more or less. Oh, Ted! She threw herself into his arms. They kissed, then broke away. The man picked up 2 large suitcases already packed. Everything else, including food and water, had been in the car for weeks, and made strides. The girl rushed after him, not bothering even to close the door of the apartment, scooping up en passant a leggy boy of 4 and a chubby, curly-haired girl of 2 or thereabouts. They ran across the lawn toward a big, low-slung sedan. "Sure you got your caffeine tablets?" he demanded as they ran. "Uh-huh." "You'll need 'em. Drive like the devil. Stay ahead. You can. This heap has got the legs of a centipede, and you've got plenty of gas and oil. 1,100 miles from anywhere and a population of 1/10 per square mile. You'll be safe there, if anybody is." "It isn't us I'm worried about. It's you," she panted. "Technos' wives get a few minutes' notice ahead of the H-blast. I'll be ahead of the rush, and I'll stay ahead. It's you, Ted, you." "Don't worry, Keed. That popsicle of mine has got legs, too, and there won't be so much traffic, the way I'm going." "Oh, blast, I didn't mean that, and you know it." They were at the car. While he jammed the 2 bags into an exactly fitting space, she tossed the children into the front seat, slid lithely behind the wheel, and started the engine. "I know you didn't, sweetheart. I'll be back." He kissed her and the little girl, the while shaking hands with his son. "Kidlets, you and your mother are going out to visit Granddad Kinnison, like we told you all about. Lots of fun. I'll be along later. Now, Lady Leadfoot, scram and shovel on the coal." The heavy vehicle backed and swung. Gravel flew as the accelerator pedal hit the floor. Kinnison galloped across the alley and opened the door of a small garage, revealing a long, squat motorcycle. 2 deft passes of his hands, and 2 of his 3 spotlights were no longer white. One flashed a brilliant purple, the other a searing blue. He dropped a perforated metal box into a hanger and flipped a switch. A peculiarly toned siren began its ululating shriek. He took the alley turn at the angle of 45 degrees, burned the pavement towards Diversey. The light was red. No matter. Everybody had stopped. That siren could be heard for miles. He barreled into the intersection. His step plate ground the concrete as he made a screaming left turn. A siren creeping up from behind. City tone, 2 red spots, city cop. So soon. Good. He cut his gun a trifle. The other bike came alongside. "Is this it?" the uniformed rider yelled over the coughing thunder of the competing exhausts. "Yes," Kinnison yelled back. "Clear Diversey to the outer drive, and the drive south to Gary and north to Waukegan. Snap it up." The white and black motorcycle slowed, shot over toward the curb. The officer reached for his microphone. Kinnison sped on. At Cicero Avenue, although he had a green light, traffic was so heavy that he had to slow down. At Pulaski, 2 policemen waved him through a red. Beyond Sacramento, nothing moved on wheels. 70, 75. He took the bridge at 80, both wheels in the air for 40 feet. 85, 90. That was about all he could do and keep the heap on so rough a road. Also, he did not have Diversey all to himself any more. Blue and purple flashing bikes were coming in from every side street. He slowed to a conservative 50 and went into close formation with the other riders. The H-blast. The citywide warning for the planned and supposedly orderly evacuation of all Chicago sounded, but Kinnison did not hear it. Across the park, edging over to the left so that the boys going south would have room to make the turn, even such riders as those need some room to make a turn at 50 miles an hour. Under the viaduct, biting brakes and squealing tires at that sharp, narrow right-angle left turn, north on the wide, smooth drive. That highway was made for speed. So were those machines. Each rider, as he got into the flat, lay down along his tank, tucked his chin behind the crossbar, and twisted both throttles out against their stops. They were in a hurry. They had a long way to go, and if they did not get there in time to stop those transpolar atomic missiles, all hell would be out for noon. Why was all this necessary? This organization, this haste, this split-second timing? This citywide exhibition of insane hippodrome riding? Why were not all these motorcycle racers stationed permanently at their posts, so as to be ready for any emergency? Because America, being a democracy, could not strike first, but had to wait in instant readiness until she was actually attacked. Because every good techno in America had his assigned place in some American defense plan, of which Operation Bullfinch was only one. Because without the presence of those technos at their everyday jobs, all ordinary technological work in America would perforce have stopped. A branch road curved away to the right. Scarcely slowing down, Kinnison bulleted into the turn and through an open, heavily guarded gate. Here his mount and his lights were passwords enough. The real test would come later. He approached a towering structure of alloy, jammed on his brakes, stopped beside a soldier who, as soon as Kinnison jumped off, mounted the motorcycle and drove it away. Kinnison dashed up to an apparently blank wall, turned his back upon 4 commissioned officers holding cocked .45s at the ready, and fitted his right eye into a cup. Unlike fingerprints, retinal patterns cannot be imitated, duplicated, or altered. Any impostor would have died instantly without arrest or question. For every man who belonged aboard that rocket had been checked and tested. How he had been checked and tested! Since one spy in any one of those technos' chairs could wreak damage untellable. The port snapped open. Kinnison climbed the ladder into the large but crowded operations room. "Hi, Teddy." A yellow rose. "Hi, Walt." "Hi, Red." "What ho, Baldy?" And so on. These men were friends of old. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Is our stuff getting away? Let me take a peek at the ball." "I'll say it is." "Okay, Ted, squeeze in here." He squeezed in. It was not a ball, but a hemisphere, slightly oblate and centered approximately by the North Pole. A multitude of red dots moved slowly. 100 miles upon that map was a small distance, northward over Canada. A closer-packed, less numerous group of yellowish-greens, already on the American side of the pole, was coming south. As had been expected, the Americans had more missiles than did the enemy. The other belief that America had more adequate defenses and better trained, more highly skilled defenders would soon be put to the test. A string of blue lights blazed across the continent, from Nome through Skagway and Wollaston and Churchill and Kaniapiskau to Belle Isle. America's first line of defense, regulars all. Ambers almost blanketed those blues. Their combat rockets were already grabbing altitude. The second line, from Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver across to Halifax, also showed solid green, with some flashes of amber, part regulars, part National Guard. Chicago was in the third line, all National Guard, extending from San Francisco to New York. Green, alert and operating, so were the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th. Operation Bullfinch was clicking, on schedule to the second. A bell clanged. The men sprang to their stations and strapped down. Every chair was occupied. Combat rocket number 10685, full-powered by the disintegrating nuclei of unstable isotopes, took off with a whooshing roar which even her thick walls could not mute. The technos, crushed down into their form-fitting cushions by 3 Gs of acceleration, clenched their teeth and took it. Higher, faster. The rocket shivered and trembled as it hit the wall at the velocity of sound, but it did not pause. Higher, faster, higher, 50 miles high, 100, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, half a radius, the designated altitude at which the Chicago contingent would go into action. Acceleration was cut to 0. The technos, breathing deeply in relief, donned peculiarly goggled helmets and set up their panels. Kinnison stared into his plate with everything he could put into his optic nerve. This was not like the ball, in which the lights were electronically placed, automatically controlled, clear, sharp, and steady. This was radar. A radar considerably different from that of 1948, of course, and greatly improved, but still pitifully inadequate in dealing with objects separated by hundreds of miles and traveling at velocities of thousands of miles per hour. Nor was this like the practice cruises, in which the targets had been harmless barrels or equally harmless dirigible rockets. This was the real thing. The targets today would be lethal objects indeed. Practice gunnery with only a place in the proficiency list at stake had been exciting enough. This was too exciting, much too exciting, for the keenness of brain and the quickness and steadiness of eye and of hand so soon to be required. A target? Or was it? Yes, 3 or 4 of them. Target 1, Zone 10. A quiet voice spoke into Kinnison's ear, and one of the white specks upon his plate turned yellowish-green. The same words, the same lights were heard and seen by the 11 other technos of Sector A, of which Kinnison, by virtue of standing at the top of the combat rocket's proficiency list, was Sector Chief. He knew that the voice was that of Sector A's fire control officer, whose duty it was to determine from courses, velocities, and all other data to be had from ground and lofty observers, the order in which his sector's targets should be eliminated. And Sector A, an imaginary but sharply defined cone, was, in normal maneuvering, the hottest part of the sky. Fire Control's Zone 10 had informed him that the object was at extreme range and hence there would be plenty of time. Nevertheless, Lawrence, 2, Doyle, 1, Drummond, stand by with 3. He snapped at the first word. In the instant of hearing his name, each techno stabbed down a series of studs, and there flowed into his ears a rapid stream of figures, the up-to-the-second data from every point of observation as to every element of motion of his target. He punched the figures into his calculator, which would correct automatically for the motion of his own vessel, glanced once at the printed solution of the problem, tramped down upon a pedal once, twice, or 3 times, depending upon the number of projectiles he had been directed to handle. Kinnison had ordered Lawrence, a better shot than Doyle, to launch 2 torpedoes, neither of which at such long range was expected to strike its mark. His second, however, should come close, so close that the instantaneous data sent back to both screens and to Kinnison's by the torpedo itself would make the target a sitting duck for Doyle, the less proficient follower. Drummond, Kinnison's number 3, would not launch his missiles unless Doyle missed. Nor could both Drummond and Harper, Kinnison's number 2, be out at once. One of the 2 had to be in at all times to take Kinnison's place in charge of the sector if the chief were ordered out. For while Kinnison could order either Harper or Drummond on target, he could not send himself. He could go out only when ordered to do so by fire control. Sector chiefs were reserved for emergency use only. Target 2, Zone 9, fire control said. Carney, 2, French, 1, Day, stand by with 3, Kinnison ordered. Damn it, missed. This from Doyle. Buck fever, no end. Okay, boy, that's why we're starting so soon. I'm shaking like a vibrator myself. We'll get over it. The point of light, which represented Target 1, bulged slightly and went out. Drummond had connected and was back in. Target 3, Zone 8, 4-8, fire control remarked. Target 3, Higgins and Green. Harper, stand by. 4, Case and Santos. Lawrence. After a minute or 2 of actual combat, the technos of Sector A began to steady down. Standby men were no longer required and were no longer assigned. Target 40, 1-6, set fire control, and Lawrence 2, Doyle 2, ordered Kinnison. This was routine enough, but in a moment... Ted, Lawrence snapped. Missed, wide, both barrels. 41's dodging, manned or directed, coming like hell. Watch it, Doyle, watch it! Kinnison, take it, fire control barked. Voice now neither low nor steady, and without waiting to see whether Doyle would hit or miss. It's in Zone 3 already, collision course. Harper, take over. Kinnison got the data, solved the equations, launched 5 torpedoes at 50 gravities of acceleration. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The last 3 as close together as they could fly without setting off their proximity fuses. Communications and mathematics and the electronic brains of calculating machines had done all that they could do. The rest was up to human skill, to the perfection of coordination and the speed of reaction of human mind, nerve, and muscle. Kinnison's glance darted from plate to panel to computer tape to meter to galvanometer and back to plate. His left hand moved in tiny arcs the knobs whose rotations varied the intensities of two mutually perpendicular components of his torpedo's drives. He listened attentively to the reports of triangulation observers, now giving him data covering his own missiles as well as the target object. The fingers of his right hand punched almost constantly the keys of his computer. He corrected almost constantly his torpedo's course. Up a hair, he decided. Left about a point. The target moved away from its predicted path. Down 2, left 3, down a hair. Right! The thing was almost through. Zone 2 was blasting into Zone 1. He thought for a second that his first torp was going to connect. It almost did. Only a last instant, full-powered side thrust enabled the target to evade it. 2 numbers flashed white upon his plate. His actual error, exact to the foot of distance and to the degree of the clock, measured and transmitted back to his board by instruments in his torpedo. Working with instantaneous and exact data, and because the enemy had so little time in which to act, Kinnison's second projectile made a very near miss indeed. His third was a graze, so close that its proximity fuse functioned, detonating the cyclonite-packed warhead. Kinnison knew that his third went off because the error figures vanished almost in the instant of their coming into being, as its detecting and transmitting instruments were destroyed. That one detonation might have been enough, but Kinnison had had one glimpse of his error, how small it was, and had a fraction of a second of time. Hence 4 and 5 slammed home dead center. Whatever that target had been, it was no longer a threat. Kinnison in. He reported briefly to Fire Control, and took over from Harper the direction of the activities of Sector A. The battle went on. Kinnison sent Harper and Drummond out time after time. He himself was given 3 more targets. The first wave of the enemy, what was left of it, passed. Sector A went into action again at extreme range upon the second. Its remains, too, plunged downward and outward toward the distant ground. The third wave was really tough. Not that it was actually any worse than the first 2 had been, but the CR-10685 was no longer getting the data which her technos ought to have to do a good job, and every man aboard her knew why. Some enemy stuff had got through, of course, and the observatories, both on the ground and above it, the eye of the whole American defense, had suffered heavily. Nevertheless, Kinnison and his fellows were not too perturbed. Such a condition was not entirely unexpected. They were now veterans. They had been tried and had not been found wanting. They had come unscathed through a bath of fire, the like of which the world had never known before. Give them any kind of computation at all, or no computation at all, except old CR-10685's own radar and their own torps, of which they still had plenty, and they could and would take care of anything that could be thrown at them. The third wave passed. Targets became fewer and fewer. Action slowed down, stopped. The technos, even the sector chiefs, knew nothing whatever of the progress of the battle as a whole. They did not know where their rocket was, or whether it was going north, east, south, or west. They knew when it was going up or down only by the seats of their pants. They did not even know the nature of the targets they destroyed, since upon their plates all targets looked alike, small, bright, greenish yellow spots. Hence, "Give us the dope, Pete, if we got a minute to spare," Kinnison begged of his fire control officer. "You know more than we do. Give." "It's coming in now," came the prompt reply. 6 of those targets that did such fancy dodging were atomics aimed at the lines. 5 were dirigibles with our number on 'em. You fellows did a swell job. Very little of their stuff got through. Not enough, they say, to do much damage to a country as big as the USA. On the other hand, they stopped scarcely any of ours. They apparently didn't have anything to compare with you technos. But all hell seems to be busting loose all over the world. Our east and west coasts are being attacked, they say, but are holding. Operation Daisy and Operation Fairfield are clicking, just like we did. Europe, they say, is going to hell. Everybody is taking pot shots at everybody else. One report says that the South American nations are bombing each other. Asia, too, nothing definite. As straight dope comes in, I'll relay it to you. We came through in very good shape, considering losses less than anticipated, only 7%. The first line, as you know already, took a god-awful shellacking. In fact, the Churchill-Belcher section was practically wiped out, which was what lost us about all of our observation. We are now just about over the southern end of Hudson Bay, heading down and south to join in making the vertical fleet formation. No more waves coming. but they say to expect attacks from low-flying combat rockets. There goes the alert. On your toes, fellow. But there isn't a thing on Sector A's screen." There wasn't. Since the CR-10685 was diving downward and southward, there wouldn't be. Nevertheless, some observer aboard that rocket saw that atomic missile coming. Some fire control officer yelled orders. Some technos did their best and failed. And such is the violence of nuclear fission, so utterly incomprehensible is its speed, that Theodore K. Kinnison died without realizing that anything whatever was happening to his ship or to him. Gharlane of Eddore looked upon ruined Earth, his handiwork, and found it good. Knowing that it would be many of hundreds of Tellurian years before that planet would again require his personal attention, he went elsewhere, to Rigel 4, to Pallane 7, and to the solar system of Valencia, where he found that his creatures, the overlords, were not progressing according to schedule. He spent quite a little time there, then searched minutely and fruitlessly for evidence of inimical activity within the innermost circle. And upon Far Arisia a momentous decision was made. The time had come to curb sharply the hitherto unhampered Eddorians. "We are ready, then, to war openly upon them?" Eukonidor asked, somewhat doubtfully. Again, to cleanse the planet, Tellus, of dangerous radioactives and of too noxious forms of life is of course a simple matter. From our protected areas in North America, a strong but democratic government can spread to cover the world. That government can be extended easily enough to include Mars and Venus. But Gharlane, who is to operate as Roger, who has already planted in the adepts of North Polar Jupiter the seeds of the Jovian Wars— Your visualization is sound, youth. Think on. Those interplanetary wars are of course inevitable, and will serve to strengthen and to unify the government of the inner planets, provided that Gharlane does not interfere. Oh, I see. Gharlane will not at first know, since a zone of compulsion will be held upon him. When he or some Eddorian fusion perceives that compulsion and breaks it, at some such time of high stress as the Nevian incident, it will be too late. Our fusions will be operating. Roger will be allowed to perform only such acts as will be for civilization's eventual good. Nevia was selected as prime operator because of its location in a small region of the galaxy which is almost devoid of solid iron, and because of its watery nature, its aquatic forms of life being precisely those in which the Eddorians are least interested. They will be given partial neutralization of inertia. They will be able to attain velocities a few times greater than that of light. That covers the situation, I think." "Very good, Eukonidor," the elders approved. "A concise and accurate summation." Hundreds of Tellurian years passed. The aftermath, reconstruction, advancement, one world, two worlds, three worlds, united, harmonious, friendly. The Jovian Wars, a solid, unshakable union. Nor did any Eddorian know that such fantastically rapid progress was being made. Indeed, Gharlane knew, as he drove his immense ship of space towards Sol, that he would find Tellus inhabited by peoples little above savagery. And it should be noted in passing that not once, throughout all those centuries, did a man named Kinnison marry a girl with red bronze auburn hair and gold-flecked tawny eyes. End of Chapter 6. Triplanetary, first in the Lensman series by E. Doc Smith. Chapter 7, Pirates of Space. Apparently motionless to her passengers and crew, the interplanetary liner Hyperion bored serenely onward through space at normal acceleration. In the railed-off sanctum in one corner of the control room, a bell tinkled, a smothered whir was heard, and Captain Bradley frowned as he studied the brief message upon the tape of the recorder. A message flashed to his desk from the operator's panel. He beckoned, and the second officer, whose watch it was now, read aloud, "Reports of Scout Patrol still negative." Still negative. The officer scowled in thought. They've already searched beyond the widest possible location of wreckage, too. 2 unexplained disappearances inside a month. First the Dione, then the Rhea, and not a plate nor a lifeboat recovered. Looks bad, sir. 1 might be an accident. 2 might possibly be a coincidence. His voice died away. But at 3 it would get to be a habit. The captain finished the thought. And whatever happened, happened quick. Neither of them had time to say a word. Their location recorders simply went dead. But of course they didn't have our detector screens, nor our armament. According to the observatories, we're in clear ether, but I wouldn't trust them from Tellus to Luna. You have given the new orders, of course? Yes, sir. Detectors full out, all 3 courses of defensive screen on the trips, projectors manned, suits on the hooks. Every object detected is to be investigated immediately. If vessels, they are to be warned to stay beyond extreme range. Anything entering the 4th zone is to be rayed. Right. We are going through. But no known type of vessel could have made away with them without detection, the second officer argued. I wonder if there isn't something in those wild rumors we've been hearing lately. Bah! Of course not, snorted the captain. Pirates in ships faster than light? Subethereal rays? Nullification of gravity mass without inertia? Ridiculous. Proved impossible over and over again. No, sir, if pirates are operating in space, and it looks very much like it, they won't get far against a good battery full of kilowatt-hours behind 3 courses of heavy screen, and good gunners behind multiplex projectors. They're good enough for anybody. Pirates, Neptunians, angels, or devils, and ships are on broomsticks. If they tackle the Hyperion, we'll burn them out of the ether. Leaving the captain's desk, the watch officer resumed his tour of duty. The 6 great lookout plates into which the alert observers peered were blank, their far-flung, ultra-sensitive detector screens encountering no obstacle. The ether was empty for thousands upon thousands of kilometers. The signal lamps upon the pilot's panel were dark. Its warning bells were silent. A brilliant point of white light in the center of the pilot's closely ruled micrometer grating, exactly upon the crosshairs of his detectors, showed that the immense vessel was precisely upon the calculated course, as laid down by the automatic integrating course plotters. Everything was quiet and in order. "All's well, sir," he reported briefly to Captain Bradley. But all was not well. Danger, more serious by far in that it was not external, was even then all unsuspected, gnawing at the great ship's vitals. In a locked and shielded compartment, deep down in the interior of the liner, was the great air purifier. Now a man leaned against the primary duct, the aorta through which flowed the stream of pure air supplying the entire vessel. This man, grotesque in full panoply of space armor, leaned against the duct. And as he leaned, a drill bit deeper and deeper into the steel wall of the pipe. Soon it broke through, and the slight rush of air was stopped by the insertion of a tightly fitting rubber tube. The tube terminated in a heavy rubber balloon, which surrounded a frail glass bulb. The man stood, tense, one hand holding before his silica and steel helmeted head a large pocket chronometer, the other lightly grasping the balloon. A sneering grin was upon his face as he waited the exact second of action, the carefully predetermined instant when his right hand, closing, would shatter the fragile flask and force its contents into the primary airstream of the Hyperion. Far above, in the main saloon, the regular evening dance was in full swing. The ship's orchestra crashed into silence. There was a patter of applause, and Cleo Marsden, radiant belle of the voyage, led her partner out onto the promenade and up to one of the observation plates. "Oh, we can't see the Earth any more," she exclaimed. "Which way do you turn this, Mr. Costigan?" "Like this." And Conway Costigan, burly young first officer of the liner, turned the dials. "There. This plate is looking back, or down, at Tellus. This other one is looking ahead." Earth was a brilliantly shining crescent far beneath the flying vessel. Above her, ruddy Mars and silvery Jupiter blazed in splendor ineffable against a background of utterly indescribable blackness. A background thickly besprinkled with dimensionless points of dazzling brilliance, which were the stars. "Oh, isn't it wonderful?" breathed the girl, awed. "Of course, I suppose that's old stuff to you, but I'm a ground gripper, you know, and I could look at it forever, I think. That's why I want to come out here after every dance. You know, Her voice broke off suddenly, with a queer, rasping catch, as she seized his arm in a frantic clutch, and as quickly went limp. He stared at her sharply, and understood instantly the message written in her eyes. Eyes now enlarged, staring, hard, brilliant, and full of soul-searing terror as she slumped down, helpless but for his support. In the act of exhaling as he was, lungs almost entirely empty, yet he held his breath until he had seized the microphone from his belt and had snapped the lever to emergency. "Control room," he gasped, and every speaker throughout the great cruiser of the void blared out the warning as he forced his already evacuated lungs to absolute emptiness. "V2 gas, get tight!" Writhing and twisting in his fierce struggle to keep his lungs from gulping in a draft of that noxious atmosphere, and with the unconscious form of the girl draped limply over his left arm, Costigan leaped toward the portal of the nearest lifeboat. Orchestra instruments crashed to the floor, and dancing couples fell and sprawled inertly, while the tortured first officer swung the door of the lifeboat open and dashed across the tiny room to the air valves. Throwing them wide open, he put his mouth to the orifice and let his laboring lungs gasp their eager fill of the cold blast roaring from the tanks. Then, air hunger partially assuaged, he again held his breath, broke open the emergency locker, donned one of the spacesuits always kept there, and opened its valves wide in order to flush out of his uniform any lingering trace of the lethal gas. He then leaped back to his companion. Shutting off the air, he released a stream of pure oxygen, held her face in it, and made shift to force some of it into her lungs by compressing and releasing her chest against his own body. Soon she drew a spasmodic breath, choking and coughing, and he again changed the gaseous stream to one of pure air, speaking urgently as she showed signs of returning consciousness. "Stand up," he snapped. "Hang on to this brace and keep your face in this airstream until I get a suit around you. Got me?" She nodded weakly, and assured that she could hold herself at the valve. It was the work of only a minute to encase her in one of the protective coverings. Then, as she sat upon a bench recovering her strength, he flipped on the lifeboat's visiphone projector and shot its invisible beam up into the control room, where he saw space-armored figures furiously busy at the panels. "Dirty work at the crossroads," he blazed to his captain, man to man, formality disregarded, as it so often was in the Triplanetary service. "There's skullduggery afoot somewhere in our primary air. Maybe that's the way they got those other two ships. Pirates. Might have been a time bomb. Don't see how anybody could have stowed away down there through the inspections. And nobody but Franklin can neutralize the shield of the air room. But I'm going to look around anyway. Then I'll join you fellows up there." "What was it?" the shaken girl asked. "I think that I remember your saying V2 gas. That's forbidden. Anyway, I owe you my life, Conway, and I'll never forget it. Never. Thanks. But the others, how about all the rest of us?" "It was V2, and it is forbidden," Costigan replied grimly, eyes fast upon the flashing plate, whose point of projection was now deep in the bowels of the vessel. "The penalty for using it or having it is death on sight. Gangsters and pirates use it, since they have nothing to lose, being on the death list already. As for your life, I haven't saved it yet. You may wish I'd let it ride before we get done. The others are too far gone for oxygen. Couldn't have brought even you around in a few more seconds, quick as I got to you. But there's a sure antidote. We all carry it in a lockbox in our armor, and we all know how to use it, because crooks all use V2, and so we're always expecting it. But since the air will be pure again in half an hour, we'll be able to revive the others easily enough if we can get by with whatever is going to happen next." "There's the bird that did it, right in the air room. It's the chief engineer's suit, but that isn't Franklin that's in it. Some passenger, disguised as Slug the Chief, took his suit and protectors, hole and duct, all washed out. Maybe that's all he was scheduled to do to us in this performance, but he'll do nothing else in his life." "Don't go down there," protested the girl. "His armor is so much better than that emergency suit you're wearing, and he's got Mr. Franklin's Lewiston besides." "Don't be an idiot," he snapped. "We can't have a live pirate aboard. We're going to be altogether too busy with outsiders directly. Don't worry, I'm not going to give him a break. I'll take a Standish. I'll rub him out like a blot. Stay right here until I come back after you," he commanded, and the heavy door of the lifeboat clanged shut behind him as he leaped out into the promenade. Straight across the saloon he made his way, paying no attention to the inert forms scattered here and there. Going up to a blank wall, he manipulated an almost invisible dial set flush with its surface, swung a heavy door aside, and lifted out the Standish, a fearsome weapon. Squat, huge, and heavy, it resembled somewhat an overgrown machine rifle, but one possessing a thick, short telescope with several opaque condensing lenses and parabolic reflectors. Laboring under the weight of the thing, he strode along the corridors and clambered heavily down short stairways. Finally he came to the purifier room, and grinned savagely as he saw the greenish haze of light obscuring the doors and walls. The shield was still in place, The pirate was still inside, still flooding with the terrible V2 the Hyperion's primary air. He set his peculiar weapon down, unfolded its 3 massive legs, crouched down behind it, and threw in a switch. Dull red beams of frightful intensity shot from the reflectors, and sparks, almost of lightning proportions, leaped from the shielding screens under their impact. Roaring and snapping, the conflict went on for seconds. Then, under the superior force of the Standish, the greenish radiance gave way. Behind it, the metal of the door ran the gamut of color, red, yellow, blinding white, then literally exploded, molten, vaporized, burned away. Through the aperture thus made, Costigan could plainly see the pirate in the space armor of the chief engineer, an armor which was proof against rifle fire, and which could reflect and neutralize for some little time even the terrific beam Costigan was employing. Nor was the pirate unarmed. A vicious flare of incandescent leaped from his Lewiston, to spend its force in spitting, crackling pyrotechnics against the either wall of the squat and monstrous Standish. But Costigan's infernal engine did not rely only upon vibratory destruction. At almost the first flash of the pirate's weapon, the officer touched a trigger, there was a double report, ear-shattering in that narrowly confined space, and the pirate's body literally flew into mist as a half-kilogram shell tore through his armor and exploded. Costigan shut off his beam, and with not the slightest softening of one hard lineament, stared around the air room, making sure that no serious damage had been done to the vital machinery of the air purifier, the very lungs of the great spaceship. Dismounting the Standish, he lugged it back up to the main saloon, replaced it in its safe, and again set the combination lock. Thence to the lifeboat, where Clio cried out in relief as she saw that he was unhurt. "Oh, Conway, I've been so afraid something would happen to you," she exclaimed, as he led her rapidly upward toward the control room. "Of course you—" She paused. "Sure," he replied laconically. "Nothing to it. How do you feel? About back to normal?" "All right, I think, except for being scared to death and just about out of control. I don't suppose that I'll be good for anything, but whatever I can do, count me in on it." "Fine. You may be needed at that. Everybody's out, apparently, except those like me who had a warning and could hold their breath until they got to their suits." "But how did you know what it was? You can't see it, nor smell it, nor anything." "You inhaled a second before I did, and I saw your eyes. I've been in it before, and when you see a man get a jolt of that stuff just once, you never forget it. The engineers down below got it first, of course. It must have wiped them out. Then we got it in the saloon. Your passing out warned me, and luckily I had enough breath left to give the word. Quite a few of the fellows up above should have had time to get away. We'll see 'em all in the control room." "I suppose that's why you revived me? In payment for so kindly warning you of the gas attack?" The girl laughed, shaky but game. "Something like that, probably," he answered lightly. "Here we are. Now we'll soon find out what's going to happen next." In the control room they saw at least a dozen armored figures, not now rushing about, but seated at their instruments, tense and ready. Fortunate it was that Costigan, veteran of space as he was, though young in years, had been down in the saloon, fortunate that he had been familiar with that horrible outlawed gas, fortunate that he had had presence of mind enough and sheer physical stamina enough to send his warning without allowing one paralyzing trace to enter his own lungs. Captain Bradley, the men on watch, and several other officers in their quarters or in the wardrooms, space-hardened veterans all, had obeyed instantly and without question the amplifier's gas command to get tight. Exhaling or inhaling, their air passages had snapped shut as that dread V2 was heard, and they had literally jumped into their armored suits of space, flushing them out with volume after volume of unquestionable air, holding their breath to the last possible second until their straining lungs could endure no more. Costigan waved the girl to a vacant bench, cautiously changing into his own armor from the emergency suit he had been wearing, and approached the captain. "Anything in sight, sir?" he asked, saluting. "They should have started something before this." "They've started, but we can't locate them. We tried to send out a general sector alarm, but had hardly started when they blanketed our wave. Look at that." Following the captain's eyes, Costigan stared at the high-powered set of the ship's operator. Upon the plate, instead of a moving, living, three-dimensional picture, there was a flashing glare of blinding white light. From the speaker, instead of intelligible speech, was issuing a roaring, crackling stream of noise. "It's impossible!" Bradley burst out violently. "There's not a gram of metal inside the fourth zone, within 100,000 kilometers, and yet they must be close to send such a wave as that. But the second thinks not. What do you think, Costigan?" The bluff commander, reactionary and of the old school as was his breed, was furious, baffled, raging inwardly to come to grips with the invisible and indetectable foe. Face to face with the inexplicable, however, he listened to the younger men with unusual tolerance. "It's not only possible, it's quite evident that they've got something we haven't." Costigan's voice was bitter. "But why shouldn't they have? Service ships never get anything until it's been experimented with for years, but pirates and such always get the new stuff as soon as it's discovered. The only good thing I can see is that we got part of a message away, and the scouts can trace that interference out there. But the pirates know that, too. It won't be long now," he concluded grimly. He spoke truly. Before another word was said, the outer screen flared white under a beam of terrific power, and simultaneously there appeared upon one of the lookout plates a vivid picture of the pirate vessel, a huge black torpedo of steel, now emitting flaring offensive beams of force. Instantly the powerful weapons of the Hyperion were brought to bear, and in the blast of full-driven beams the stranger screens flamed incandescent. Heavy guns, under the recoil of whose fierce salvos the frame of the giant globe trembled and shuddered, shot out their tons of high-explosive shell. But the pirate commander had known accurately the strength of the liner, and knew that her armament was impotent against the forces at his command. His screens were invulnerable. The giant shells were exploded harmlessly in mid-space, miles from their objective. And suddenly a frightful pencil of flame stabbed brilliantly from the black hulk of the enemy. Through the empty ether it tore, through the mighty defensive screens, through the tough metal of the outer and inner walls. Every ether defense of the Hyperion vanished, and her acceleration dropped to a quarter of its normal value. "Right through the battery room!" Bradley groaned. "We're on the emergency drive now. Our rays are done for, and we can't seem to put a shell anywhere near her with our guns." But ineffective as the guns were, they were silenced forever as a frightful beam of destruction stabbed relentlessly through the control room, whiffing out of existence the pilot, gunnery, and lookout panels, and the men before them. The air rushed into space, and the suits of the three survivors bulged out into drumhead tightness as the pressure in the room decreased. Costigan pushed the captain lightly toward a wall, then seized the girl and leaped in the same direction. "Let's get out of here quick," he cried, the miniature radio instruments of the helmets automatically taking up the duty of transmitting speech as the sound discs refused to function. "They can't see us. Our ether wall is still up, and their spy rays can't get through it from the outside, you know. They're working from blueprints, and they'll probably take your desk next." And even as they bounded toward the door, now become the outer seal of an airlock, the pirate's beam tore through the space which they had just quitted. Through the airlock, down through several levels of passengers' quarters they hurried, and into a lifeboat whose one doorway commanded the full length of the third lounge, an ideal spot either for defense or for escape outward by means of the miniature cruiser. As they entered their retreat, they felt their weight begin to increase. More and more force was applied to the helpless liner until it was moving at normal acceleration. "What do you make of that, Costigan?" asked the captain. "Tractor beams?" "Apparently. They've got something all right. They're taking us somewhere fast. I'll go get a couple of standishes and another suit of armor. We'd better dig in." And soon the small room became a veritable fortress, housing as it did those two formidable engines of destruction. Then the first officer made another and longer trip, returning with a complete suit of triplanetary space armor, exactly like those worn by the two men, but considerably smaller. "Just as an added factor of safety, you'd better put this on, Cleo. Those emergency suits aren't good for much in a battle. I don't suppose that you ever fired a Standish, did you?" "No, but I can learn soon how to do it," she replied pluckily. "Two is all that can work here at once, but you should know how to take hold in case one of us goes out. And while you're changing suits, you'd better put on some stuff I've got here. Special service phones and detectors. Stick this little disc onto your chest with this bit of tape. Low down, out of sight, just under your wishbone is the best place. Take off your wristwatch, and wear this one continuously. Never take it off for a second. Put on these pearls and wear them all the time, too. Take this capsule and hide it against your skin, some place where it can't be found except by the most rigid search. Swallow it in an emergency. It goes down easily and works just as well inside as outside. It is the most important thing of all. You can get along with it alone if you lose everything else, but without that capsule, the whole system's shot to pieces. With that outfit, if we should get separated, you can talk to us. We're both wearing 'em, although in somewhat different forms. You don't need to talk loud, just mutter will be enough. They're handy little outfits, almost impossible to find, and capable of a lot of things." "Thanks, Conway. I'll remember that, too," Clio replied, as she turned toward the tiny locker to follow his instructions. "But won't the scouts and patrols be catching us pretty quick? The operator sent a warning. Afraid the ether's empty as far as we're concerned." Captain Bradley had stood by in silent astonishment during this conversation. His eyes had bulged slightly at Costigan's "we're both wearing 'em," but he had held his peace, and as the girl disappeared, a look of dawning comprehension came over his face. "Oh, I see, sir," he said respectfully, far more respectfully than he had ever addressed a mere first officer. "Meaning that we both will be wearing them shortly, I assume. Service specials. You didn't specify exactly what service, did you?" "Now that you mention it, I don't believe that I did," Costigan grinned. "That explains several things about you, particularly your recognition of V2 and your uncanny control and speed of reaction. But aren't you—" "No," Costigan interrupted. "This situation is apt to get altogether too serious to overlook any bets. If we get away, I'll take them away from her and she'll never know that they aren't routine equipment. As for you, I know that you can and do keep your mouth shut. That's why I'm hanging this junk on you. I had a lot of stuff in my kit, but I flashed it all with the Standish except what I brought in here for us three. Whether you think so or not, we're in a real jam. Our chance of getting away is mighty close to zero." He broke off as the girl came back, now to all appearances a small Triplanetary officer, and the three settled down to a long and eventless wait. Hour after hour they flew through the ether, but finally there was a lurching swing and an abrupt increase in their acceleration. After a short consultation, Captain Bradley turned on the vis-ray set and, with the beam at its minimum power, peered cautiously downward, in the direction opposite to that in which he knew the pirate vessel must be. All three stared into the plate, seeing only an infinity of emptiness, marked only by the infinitely remote and coldly brilliant stars. While they stared into space, a vast area of the heavens was blotted out, and they saw, faintly illuminated by a peculiar blue luminescence, a vast ball, a sphere so large and so close that they seemed to be dropping downward toward it as though it were a world. They came to a stop, paused, weightless. A vast door slid smoothly aside. They were drawn upward through an airlock and floated quietly in the air above a small but brightly lighted and orderly city of metallic buildings. Gently the Hyperion was lowered to come to rest in the embracing arms of a regulation landing cradle. "Well, wherever it is, we're here," remarked Captain Bradley grimly. And now the fireworks start," assented Costigan, with a questioning glance at the girl. "Don't mind me," she answered his unspoken question. "I don't believe in surrendering either." "Right." And both men squatted down behind the ether walls of their terrific weapons, the girl prone behind them. They had not long to wait. A group of human beings, men, and to all appearances Americans, appeared unarmed in the little lounge. As soon as they were well inside the room, Bradley and Costigan released upon them without compunction the full power of their frightful projectors. From the reflectors through the doorway there tore a concentrated double beam of pure destruction, but that beam did not reach its goal. Yards from the men it met a screen of impenetrable density. Instantly the gunners pressed their triggers, and a stream of high explosive shells issued from the roaring weapons. But shells also were futile. They struck the shield and vanished. Vanished without exploding, and without leaving a trace to show that they had ever existed. Costigan sprang to his feet, but before he could launch his intended attack, a vast tunnel appeared beside him. Something had gone through the entire width of the liner, cutting effortlessly a smooth cylinder of emptiness. Air rushed in to fill the vacuum, and the three visitors felt themselves seized by invisible forces and drawn into the tunnel. Through it they floated, up to and over buildings, finally slanting downward toward the door of a great high-towered structure. Doors opened before them and closed behind them until at last they stood upright in a room which was evidently the office of a busy executive. They faced a desk which, in addition to the usual equipment of the businessman, carried also a bewilderingly complete switchboard and instrument panel. Seated impassively at the desk, there was a gray man. Not only was he dressed entirely in gray, but his heavy hair was gray, his eyes were gray, and even his tanned skin seemed to give the impression of grayness in disguise. His overwhelming personality radiated an aura of grayness, not the gentle gray of the dove, but the resistless, driving gray of the super-dreadnought, the hard, inflexible, brittle gray of the fracture of high-carbon steel. "Captain Bradley, First Officer Costigan, Miss Marsden," the man spoke quietly but crisply. "I had not intended you two men to live so long. That is a detail, however, which we will pass by for the moment. You may remove your suits." Neither officer moved, but both stared back at the speaker unflinchingly. "I am not accustomed to repeating instructions," the man at the desk continued, voice still low and level, but instinct with deadly menace. "You may choose between removing those suits and dying in them, here and now." Costigan moved over to Clio and slowly took off her armor. Then, after a flashing exchange of glances and a muttered word, the two officers threw off their suits simultaneously and fired at the same instant. Bradley with his Lewiston, Costigan with a heavy automatic pistol whose bullets were explosive shells of tremendous power. But the man in gray, surrounded by an impenetrable wall of force, only smiled at the fusillade, tolerantly and maddeningly. Costigan leaped fiercely, only to be hurled backward as he struck that unyielding invisible wall. A vicious beam snapped him back into place, the weapons were snatched away, and all three captives were held in their former positions. "I permitted that as a demonstration of futility," the gray man said, his hard voice becoming harder. "But I will permit no more foolishness. Now I will introduce myself. I am known as Roger. You probably have heard nothing of me. Very few Tellurians have, or ever will. Whether or not you two live depends solely upon yourselves. Being something of a student of men, I fear that you will both die shortly. Able and resourceful as you have just shown yourselves to be, you could be valuable to me, but you probably will not, in which case you shall, of course, cease to exist. That, however, in its proper time, you shall be of some slight service to me in the process of being eliminated. In your case, Miss Marsden, I find myself undecided between two courses of action, each highly desirable, but unfortunately mutually exclusive. Your father will be glad to ransom you at an exceedingly high figure, but in spite of that fact, I may decide to use you in a research upon sex." "Yes?" Clio rose magnificently to the occasion. Fear forgotten, her courageous spirit flashed from her clear young eyes and emanated from her taut young body, erect in defiance. "You may think that you can do anything with me that you please, but you can't." Peculiar, highly perplexing. Why should that one stimulus, in the case of young females, produce such an entirely disproportionate reaction? Roger's eyes bored into Clio's. The girl shivered and looked away. But sex itself, primal and basic, the most widespread concomitant of life in this continuum, is completely illogical and paradoxical. Most baffling. Decidedly, this research on sex must go on. Roger pressed a button, and a tall, comely woman appeared, a woman of indefinite age and of uncertain nationality. "Show Miss Marsden to her apartment," he directed, and as the two women went out, a man came in. "The cargo is unloaded, sir," the newcomer reported. "The 2 men and the 5 women indicated have been taken to the hospital." "Very well. Dispose of the others in the usual fashion." The minion went out, and Roger continued emotionlessly. "Collectively, the other passengers may be worth $1 million or so, but it would not be worth while to waste time upon them." "Who are you, anyway?" blazed Costigan, helpless but enraged beyond caution. "I have heard of mad scientists who tried to destroy the Earth, and of equally mad geniuses who thought themselves Napoleons, capable of conquering even the solar system. Whichever you are, you should know that you can't get away with it." "I am neither. I am, however, a scientist, and I direct many other scientists. I am not mad. You have undoubtedly noticed several peculiar features of this place." "Yes, particularly the artificial gravity and those screens. An ordinary ether wall is opaque in one direction and doesn't bar matter. Yours are transparent both ways, and something more than impenetrable to matter. How do you do it?" "You would not understand them if I explained them to you, and they are merely 2 of our smaller developments. I do not intend to destroy your planet Earth. I have no desire to rule over masses of futile and brainless men. I have, however, certain ends of my own in view. To accomplish my plans, I require hundreds of millions in gold and other hundreds of millions in uranium, thorium, and radium, all of which I shall take from the planets of this solar system before I leave it. I shall take them in spite of the puerile efforts of the fleets of your Triplanetary League. This structure was designed by me and built under my direction. It is protected from meteorites by forces of my devising. It is indetectable and invisible. Ether waves are bent around it without loss or distortion. I am discussing these points at such length so that you may realize exactly your position. As I have intimated, you can be of assistance to me if you will. Now, just what could you offer any man to make him join your outfit? Demanded Costigan venomously. Many things. Roger's cold tone betrayed no emotion, no recognition of Costigan's open and bitter contempt. I have under me many men bound to me by many ties. Needs, wants, longings, and desires differ from man to man, and I can satisfy practically any of them. Many men take delight in the society of young and beautiful women, but there are other urges which I have found quite efficient. Greed, thirst for fame, longing for power, and so on, including many qualities usually regarded as noble. And what I promise, I deliver. I demand only loyalty to me, and that only in certain things and for a relatively short period. In all else, my men do as they please. In conclusion, I can use you two conveniently, but I do not need you. Therefore, you may choose now between my service and the alternative. Exactly what is the alternative? We will not go into that. Suffice to say that it has to do with a minor research which is not progressing satisfactorily. It will result in your extinction, and perhaps I should mention that that extinction will not be particularly pleasant. I say no, you... Bradley roared. He intended to give an unexpurgated classification, but was rudely interrupted. Hold on a minute, snapped Costigan. How about Miss Marston? She has nothing to do with this discussion, returned Roger icily. I do not bargain. In fact, I believe that I shall keep her for a time. She has it in mind to destroy herself if I do not allow her to be ransomed, but she will find that door closed to her until I permit it to open. In that case, I string along with the chief. Take what he started to say about you and run it clear across the board for me, barked Costigan. Very well, that decision was to be expected for men of your type. The gray man touched two buttons, and two of his creatures entered the room. Put these men into two separate cells on the second level, he ordered. Search them. All their weapons may not have been in their armor. Seal the doors and mount special guards tuned to me here. Imprisoned they were, and carefully searched. But they bore no arms, and nothing had been said concerning communicators. Even if such instruments could be concealed, Roger would detect their use instantly. At least, so ran his thought. But Roger's men had no inkling of the possibility of Costigan's special service phones, detectors, and spy rays, instruments of minute size and of infinitesimal power, but yet instruments which, working as they were below the level of the ether, were effective at great distances, and caused no vibrations in the ether by which their use could be detected. And what could be more innocent than the regulation personal equipment of every officer of space? The heavy goggles, the wristwatch, and its supplementary pocket chronometer, the flash lamp, the automatic lighter, the sender, the money belt. All these items of equipment were examined with due care, but the cleverest minds of the Triplanetary Service had designed those communicators to pass any ordinary search, however careful, and when Costigan and Bradley were finally locked into the designated cells, they still possessed their ultra-instruments. End of Chapter 7. Triplanetary, first in the Lensman series by E. Doc Smith. Chapter 8, In Roger's Planetoid. In the hall, Clio glanced around her wildly, seeking even the narrowest avenue of escape. Before she could act, however, her body was clamped as though in a vice, and she struggled motionless. It is useless to attempt to escape, or to do anything except what Roger wishes, the guide informed her somberly, snapping off the instrument in her hand, and thus restoring to the thoroughly cowed girl her freedom of motion. His lightest wish is law, she continued as they walked down a long corridor. The sooner you realize that you must do exactly as he pleases in all things, the easier your life will be. But I wouldn't want to keep on living, Clio declared with a flash of spirit. And I can always die, you know. You will find that you cannot, the passionless creature returned monotonously. If you do not yield, you will long and pray for death, but you will not die unless Roger wills it. Look at me. I cannot die. Here is your apartment. You will stay here until Roger gives further orders concerning you. The living automaton opened a door and stood silent and impassive, while Clio, staring at her in horror, shrank past her and into the sumptuously furnished suite. The door closed soundlessly, and utter silence descended as a pall. Not an ordinary silence, but the indescribable perfection of the absolute silence, complete absence of all sound. In that silence Clio stood motionless, tense and rigid, hopeless, despairing. She stood there in that magnificent room, fighting an almost overwhelming impulse to scream. Suddenly she heard the cold voice of Roger, speaking from the empty air. "You are overwrought, Miss Marsden. You can be of no use to yourself or to me in that condition. I command you to rest, and to ensure that rest, you may pull that cord, which will establish about this room an ether wall, a wall to cut off even this, my voice." The voice ceased as she pulled the cord savagely, and threw herself upon a divan in a torrent of gasping, strangling, but rebellious sobs. Then again came a voice, but not to her ears. Deep within her, pervading every bone and muscle, it made itself felt rather than heard. "Clio?" it asked. "Don't talk yet." "Conway!" she gasped in relief. Every fiber of her being thrilled into new hope at the deep, well-remembered voice of Conway Costigan. "Keep still," he snapped. "Don't act so happy. He may have a spy ray on you. He can't hear me, but he may be able to hear you. When he was talking to you, you must have noticed a sort of rough, sandpapery feeling under that necklace I gave you. Since he's got an ether wall around you, the beads are dead now. If you feel anything like that under the wristwatch, breathe deeply twice. If you don't feel anything there, it's safe for you to talk as loud as you please." "I don't feel anything, Conway," she rejoiced. Tears forgotten, she was her old buoyant self again. "So that wall is real, after all. I only about half believed it." "Don't trust it too much, because he can cut it off from the outside any time he wants to. Remember what I told you. That necklace will warn you of any spy ray in the ether, and the watch will detect anything below the level of the ether. It's dead now, of course, since our 3 phones are direct connected. I'm in touch with Bradley, too. Don't be too scared. We've got a lot better chance than I thought we had." "What? You don't mean it?" "Absolutely. I'm beginning to think that maybe we've got something he doesn't know exists. Our ultra wave. Of course, I wasn't surprised when his searchers failed to find our instruments, but it never occurred to me that I might have a clear field to use them in. I can't quite believe it yet, but I haven't been able to find any indication that he can even detect the bands we are using. I'm going to look around over there with my spy ray. I'm looking at you now. Feel it?" "Yes, the watch feels that way now." "Fine. Not a sign of interference over here either. I can't find a trace of ultrawave, anything below ether level, you know, anywhere in the whole place. He's got so much stuff that we've never heard of that I supposed, of course, he'd have ultrawave too, but if he hasn't, that gives us the edge. Well, Bradley and I have got a lot of work to do. Wait a minute, I just had a thought. I'll be back in about a second." There was a brief pause, then the soundless but clear voice went on. "Good hunting. That woman that gave you the blue willies isn't alive. She's full of the prettiest machinery and circuits you ever saw." "Oh, Conway!" And the girl's voice broke in an engulfing wave of thanksgiving and relief. "It was so utterly horrible, thinking of what must have happened to her and to others like her." "He's running a colossal bluff, I think. He's good, all right, but he lacks quite a lot of being omnipotent. But don't get too cocky either. Plenty has happened to plenty of women here, and men too, and plenty may happen to us, unless we put out a few jets. Keep a stiff upper lip, and if you want us, yell. Bye." The silent voice ceased. The watch upon Clio's wrist again became an unobtrusive timepiece, and Costigan, in his solitary cell far below her tower room, turned his peculiarly goggled eyes toward other scenes. His hands, apparently idle in his pockets, manipulated tiny controls. His keen, highly trained eyes studied every concealed detail of mechanism of the great globe. Finally he took off the goggles and spoke in a low voice to Bradley, confined in another windowless room across the hall. "I think I've got dope enough, Captain. I found out where he put our armor and guns, and I've located all the main leads, controls, and generators. There are no ether walls around us here, but every door is shielded, and there are guards outside our doors, one to each of us. They're robots, not men. That makes it harder since they're undoubtedly connected direct to Roger's desk and will give an alarm at the first hint of abnormal performance. We can't do a thing until he leaves his desk. See that black panel a little below the cord switch to the right of your door? That's the conduit cover. When I give you the word, tear that off and you'll see one red wire in the cable. It feeds the shield generator for your door. Break that wire and join me out in the hall. Sorry, I had only one of these ultrawave spies, but once we're together it won't be so bad. Here's what I thought we could do. And he went over, in detail, the only course of action which his survey had shown to be possible. There, he's left his desk, Costigan exclaimed after the conversation had continued for almost an hour. Now, as soon as we find out where he's going, we'll start something. He's going to see Cleo, the swine. This changes things, Bradley. His hard voice was a curse. Somewhat, blazed the captain. I know how you two have been getting on during all the cruise. I'm with you, but what can we do? We'll do something, Costigan declared grimly. If he makes a pass at her, I'll get him if I have to blow this whole sphere out of space, with us in it. Don't do that, Conway. Cleo's low voice, trembling but determined, was felt by both men. If there's a chance for you to get away and do anything about fighting him, don't mind me. Maybe he only wants to talk about the ransom anyway. He wouldn't talk ransom to you. He's going to talk something else entirely. Costigan gritted, then his voice changed suddenly. But say, maybe it's just as well this way. They didn't find our specials when they searched us, you know, and we're going to do plenty of damage right soon now. Roger probably isn't a fast worker, more the cat-and-mouse type, I'd say, and after we get started, he'll have something on his mind beside you. Think you can stall him off and keep him interested for about 15 minutes? I'm sure I can. I'll do anything to help us, or you, get away from this horrible... Her voice ceased as Roger broke the ether wall of her apartment and walked toward the divan upon which she crouched in wide-eyed, helpless, trembling terror. Get ready, Bradley, Costigan directed tersely. He left Cleo's ether wall off so that any abnormal signals would be relayed to him from his desk. He knows there's no chance of anyone disturbing him in that room. But I'm holding a beam on that switch so that the wall is on full strength. No matter what we do now, he can't get a warning. I'll have to hold the beam exactly in place, though, so you'll have to do the dirty work. Tear out that red wire and kill those two guards. You know how to kill a robot, don't you? Yes, break his eye lenses and his eardrums, and he'll stop whatever he's doing and send out distress calls. Got 'em both. Now what? Open my door. The shield switch is to the right. Costigan's door flew open, and the Triplanetary captain leaped into the room. Now for our armor, he cried. Not yet, snapped Costigan. He was standing rigid, goggled eyes, staring immovably at a spot on the ceiling. I can't move a millimeter until you've closed Cleo's ether wall switch. If I take this ray off it for a second, we're sunk. 5 floors up, straight ahead, down a corridor, 4th door on right. When you're at the switch, you'll feel my ray on your watch. Snap it up. Right. And the captain leaped away at a pace to be equaled by few men of half his years. Soon he was back, and after Costigan had tested the ether wall of the bridal suite to make sure that no warning signal from his desk or his servants could reach Roger within it, the two officers hurried away toward the room in which their space armor was. Too bad they don't wear uniforms, panted Bradley, short of breath from the many flights of stairs. Might have helped some as disguise. I doubt it. With so many robots around, they probably got signals that we couldn't understand anyway. If we meet anybody, it'll mean a battle. Hold it. Peering through walls with his spy ray, Costigan had seen 2 men approaching, blocking an intersecting corridor into which they must turn. 2 of them, a man and a robot. The robot's on your side. We'll wait here, right at the corner. When they round it, take 'em. And Costigan put away his goggles in readiness for strife. All unsuspecting, the 2 pirates came into view, and as they appeared, the 2 officers struck. Costigan, on the inside, drove a short, hard right low into the human pirate's abdomen. The fiercely driven fist sank to the wrist into the soft tissues, and the stricken man collapsed. But even as the blow landed, Costigan had seen that there was a 3rd enemy following close behind the 2 he had been watching, a pirate who was even then training a ray projector upon him. Reacting automatically, Costigan swung his unconscious opponent around in front of him so that it was into an enemy's body that the vicious ray tore, and not into his own. Crouching down into the smallest possible compass, he straightened out with the lashing force of a mighty steel spring, hurling the corpse straight at the flaming mouth of the projector. The weapon crashed to the floor, and dead pirate and living went down in a heap. Upon that heap, Costigan hurled himself, feeling for the pirate's throat. But the fellow had wriggled clear, and countered with a gouging thrust that would have torn out the eyes of a slower man, following it up instantly with a savage kick for the groin. No automaton this, geared and set to perform certain fixed duties with mechanical precision, but a lithe, strong man in hard training, fighting with every foul trick known to his murderous ilk. But Costigan was no trio in the art of dirty fighting. Few indeed were the maiming tricks of foul combat unknown to even the rank and file of the highly efficient undercover branch of the Triplanetary service, and Costigan, a sector chief, knew them all. Not for pleasure, sportsmanship, nor million-dollar purses did those secret agents use nature's weapons. They came to grips only when it could not possibly be avoided, but when they were forced to fight in that fashion, they went in with but one grim purpose: to kill, and to kill in the shortest possible space of time. Thus it was that Costigan's opening soon came. The pirate launched a vicious coup de sabot, which Costigan avoided by a lightning shift. It was a slight shift, barely enough to make the kicker miss, and two powerful hands closed upon that flying foot in midair like the sprung jaws of a bear trap, closed and twisted viciously in the same fleeting second. There was a shriek, smothered as a heavy boot crashed to its carefully predetermined mark. The pirate was out, definitely and permanently. The struggle had lasted scarcely 10 seconds, coming to its close just as Bradley finished blinding and deafening the robot. Costigan picked up the projector, again donned his spy ray goggles, and the two hurried on. "Nice work, Chief. It must be a gift to roughhouse the way you do. That's why you took the live one?" "Practice helps some, too. I've been in brawls before, and I'm a lot younger and maybe a bit faster than you are," Costigan explained briefly, penetrating gaze rigidly to the fore as they ran along one corridor after another. Several more guards, both living and mechanical, were encountered on the way, but they were not permitted to offer any opposition. Costigan saw them first. In the furious beam of the projector of the dead pirate, they were riven into nothingness, and the two officers sped on to the room which Costigan had located from afar. The 3 suits of Triplanetary space armor had been locked up in a cabinet whose doors Costigan literally blew off with a blast of force rather than consume time in tracing the power leads. "I feel like something now." Costigan, once more encased in his own armor, heaved a great sigh of relief. "Rough and tumble's all right with 1 or 2, but that generator room is full of grief, and we don't have any too much stuff as it is. We've got to take Cleo's suit along. We'll carry it down to the door of the power room, drop it there, and pick it up on the way back." Contemptuous now of possible guards, the armored pair strode toward the power plant, the very heart of the immense fortress of space. Guards were encountered, and captains, officers who signaled frantically to their chief, since he alone could unleash the frightful forces at his command, and who profanely wondered at his unwonted silence. But the enemy beams were impotent against the ether walls of that armor, and the pirates, without armor in the security of their own planetoid as they were, vanished utterly in the ravening beams of the twin Lewistons. As they paused before the door of the power room, both men felt Cleo's voice raised in her first and last appeal, an appeal wrung from her against her will by the extremity of her position. "Conway, hurry! His eyes, they're tearing me apart! Hurry, dear!" In the horror-filled tones both men read clearly, however inaccurately, the girl's dire extremity. Each saw plainly a happy, carefree young Earth girl, upon her first trip into space, locked inside an ether wall with an overbrained, underconscienced human machine, a super-intelligent but lecherous and unmoral mechanism of flesh and blood, acknowledging no authority, ruled by nothing save his own scientific drivings and the almost equally powerful urges of his desires and passions. She must have fought with every resource at her command. She must have wept and pleaded, stormed and raged, feigned submission and played for time, and her torment had not touched in the slightest degree the merciless and gloating brain of the being who called himself Roger. Now his tantalizing, ruthless catplay would be done. The horrible gray-brown face would be close to hers. She wailed her final despairing message to Costigan and attacked that hideous face with the fury of a tigress. Costigan bit off a bitter imprecation. "Hold him just a second longer, sweetheart," he cried, and the power room door vanished. Through the great door the 2 Lewistons swept at full aperture and at maximum power, 2 rapidly opening fans of death and destruction. Here and there a guard, more rapid than his fellows, trained a futile projector, a projector whose magazine exploded at the touch of that frightful field of force, liberating instantaneously its thousands upon thousands of kilowatt-hours of stored-up energy. Through the delicately adjusted, complex mechanisms, the destroying beams tore. At their touch, armatures burned out, high-tension leads volatilized in crashing high-voltage arcs. Masses of metal smoked and burned in the path of vast forces now seeking the easiest path to neutralization. Delicate instruments blew up. Copper ran in streams. As the last machine subsided into a semi-molten mass of metal, the two wreckers, each grasping a brace, felt themselves become weightless and knew that they had accomplished the first part of their program. Costigan leaped for the outer door. His the task to go to Clio's aid. Bradley would follow more slowly, bringing the girl's armor and taking care of any possible pursuit. As he sailed through the air, he spoke. "Coming, Clio. All right, girl?" Questioningly, half fearfully. "All right, Conway." Her voice was almost unrecognizable, broken in retching agony. "When everything went crazy, he found out that the ether wall was up and forgot all about me. He shut it off and seemed to go crazy, too. He is floundering around like a wild man now. I'm trying to keep him from going downstairs." "Good girl. Keep him busy 1 minute more. He's getting all the warnings at once and wants to get back to his board." "But what's the matter with you? Did he hurt you after all?" "Oh, no, not that. He didn't do anything but look at me, but that was bad enough. But I'm sick, horribly sick. I'm falling. I'm so dizzy that I can scarcely see. My head is breaking up into little pieces. I just know I'm going to die, Conway. Oh, oh." "Oh, is that all?" In his sheer relief that they had been in time, Costigan did not think of sympathizing with Clio's very real present distress of mind and body. "I forgot that you're a ground gripper. That's just a little touch of space sickness. It'll wear off directly. All right, I'm coming. Let go of him and get as far away from him as you can." He was now in the street. Perhaps 200 feet distant and 100 feet above him was the tower room, in which were Clio and Roger. He sprang directly toward its large window, and as he floated upward, he corrected his course and accelerated his pace by firing backward at various angles with his heavy service pistol, uncaring that at the point of impact of each of those shells a small blast of destruction erupted. He missed the window a trifle, but that did not matter. His flaming Lewiston opened a way for him, partly through the window, partly through the wall. As he soared through the opening, he trained projector and pistol upon Roger, now almost to the door, noticing as he did so that Clio was clinging convulsively to a lamp bracket upon the wall. Door and wall vanished in the Lewiston's terrific beam, but the pirate stood unharmed. Neither ravening ray nor explosive shell could harm him. He had snapped on the protective shield, whose generator was always upon his person. When Clio reported that Roger seemed to go crazy and was floundering around like a wild man, she had no idea of how she was understanding the actual situation. For Gharlane of Eddore, then energizing the form of flesh that was Roger, had for the first time in his prodigiously long life met in direct conflict with an overwhelming superior force. Roger had been sublimely confident that he could detect the use, anywhere in or around his planetoid, of ultra-wave. He had been equally sure that he could control directly and absolutely the physical activities of any number of these semi-intelligent human beings. But 4 Arisians in fusion, Drunli, Berlintine, Nidanilor, and Cretagon, had been on guard for weeks. When the time came to act, they acted. Roger's first thought, upon discovering what tremendous and inexplicable damage had already been done, was to destroy instantly the 2 men who were doing it. He could not touch them. His second was to blast out of existence this supposedly human female, but no more could he touch her. His fiercest mental bolts spent themselves harmlessly 3 millimeters away from her skin. She gazed into his eyes, completely unaware of the torrents of energy pouring from them. He could not even aim a weapon at her. His third was to call for help to Eddore. He could not. The sub-ether was closed, nor could he either discover the manner of its closing or trace the power which was keeping it closed. His Eddorian body, even if he could recreate it here, could not withstand the environment. This Roger thing would have to do whatever it could, unaided by Gharlane's mental powers. And physically it was a very capable body indeed. Also, it was armed and armored with mechanisms of Gharlane's own devising, and Eddore's second-in-command was in no sense a coward. But Roger, while not exactly a ground gripper, did not know how to handle himself without weight, whereas Costigan, given 6 walls against which to push, was even more efficient in weightless combat than when handicapped by the force of gravitation. Keeping his projector upon the pirate, he seized the first club to hand, a long, slender pedestal of metal, launched himself past the pirate chief. With all the momentum of his mass and velocity and all the power of his good right arm, he swung the bar at the pirate's head. That fiercely driven mass of metal should have taken head from shoulders, but it did not. Roger's shield of force was utterly rigid and impenetrable. The only effect of the frightful blow was to set him spinning end over end like the flying baton of an acrobatic drum major. As the spinning form crashed against the opposite wall of the room, Bradley floated in, carrying Clio's armor. Without a word, the captain loosened the helpless girl's grip upon the bracket and encased her in the suit. Then, supporting her at the window, he held his Lewiston upon the captive's head while Costigan propelled him toward the opening. Both men knew that Roger's shield of force must be threatened every instant, that if he were allowed to release it, he probably would bring to bear a hand weapon even superior to their own. Braced against the wall, Costigan sighted along Roger's body toward the most distant point of the lofty dome of the artificial planet and gave him a gentle push. Then, each grasping Clio by an arm, the 2 officers shoved mightily with their feet, and the 3 armored forms darted away toward their only hope of escape, an emergency boat which could be launched through the shell of the great globe. To attempt to reach the Hyperion and to escape in one of her lifeboats would have been useless. They could not have forced the great gates of the main airlocks, and no other exits existed. As they sailed onward through the air, Costigan keeping the slowly floating form of Roger enveloped in his beam, Clio began to recover. "Suppose they get their gravity fixed," she asked apprehensively, "and they're raying us and shooting at us." "They may have it fixed already. They undoubtedly have spare parts and duplicate generators, but if they turn it on, the fall will kill Roger too, and he wouldn't like that. They'll have to get him down with a helicopter or something, and they know we'll get them as fast as they come up. They can't hurt us with hand weapons, and before they can bring up any heavy stuff, they'll be afraid to use it because we'll be too close to their shell. I wish we could have brought Roger along," he continued savagely to Bradley. "But you were right, of course. It'd be altogether too much like a rabbit capturing a wildcat. My Lewiston's about done right now, and there can't be much left of yours. What he'd do to us would be a sin and a shame." Now at the great wall, the 2 men heaved mightily upon a lever. The gate of the emergency port swung slowly open, and they entered the miniature cruiser of the void. Costigan, familiar with the mechanism of the craft from careful study from his prison cell, manipulated the controls. Through gate after massive gate they went, until finally they were out in open space, shooting toward distant Tellus at the maximum acceleration of which their small craft was capable. Costigan cut the other 2 phones out of the circuit and spoke, his attention fixed upon some extremely distant point. "Samms," he called sharply. "Costigan, we're out. All right. Yes. Sure. Absolutely. You tell 'em, Sammy. I've got company here." Through the sound discs of their helmets, the girl and the captain had heard Costigan's share of the conversation. Bradley stared at his erstwhile first officer in amazement, and even Clio had often heard that mighty, half-mythical name. Surely that bewildering young man must rank high to speak so familiarly with Virgil Samms, the all-powerful head of the space-pervading service of the Triplanetary League. "You've turned in a general call-out," Bradley stated, rather than asked. "Long ago. I've been in touch right along," Costigan answered. "Now that they know what to look for, and know that ether wave detectors are useless, they can find it. Every vessel in 7 sectors, clear down to scout patrols, is concentrating on this point, and the call is out for all battleships and cruisers afloat. There are enough operatives out there with ultra waves to locate that globe, and once they spot it, they'll point it out to all the other vessels." "But how about the other prisoners?" asked the girl. "They'll be killed, won't they?" "Hard telling," Costigan shrugged. "Depends on how things turn out. We lack a lot of being safe ourselves yet." "What's worrying me mostly is our own chance," Bradley assented. "They will chase us, of course." "Sure, and they'll have more speed than we have. Depends on how far away the nearest triplanetary vessels are. But we've done everything we can do for now." Silence fell, and Costigan cut in Clio's phone and came over to the seat upon which she was reclining, white and stricken, worn out by the horrible and terrifying ordeals of the last few hours. As he seated himself beside her, she blushed vividly, but her deep blue eyes met his gray ones steadily. "Clio, that is—" He flushed hotly and stopped. This secret agent, whose clear, keen brain no physical danger could cloud, who had proved over and over again that he was never at a loss in any emergency, however desperate, this quick-witted officer floundered in embarrassment like any schoolboy, but continued doggedly. "I'm afraid that I gave myself away back there, but—" "We gave ourselves away, you mean." She filled in the pause. "I did my share, but I won't hold you to it if you don't want. But I know that you love me, Conway." "Love you," the man groaned, his face lined and hard, his whole body rigid. "That doesn't half tell it, Cleo. You don't need to hold me. I'm held for life. There never was a woman who meant anything to me before. There never will be another. You're the only woman that ever existed. It isn't that. Can't you see that it's impossible?" "Of course I can't. It isn't impossible at all." She released her shields. 4 hands met and tightly clasped. Her low voice thrilled with feeling as she went on. "You love me, and I love you. That is all that matters." "I wish it were," Costigan returned bitterly. "But you don't know what you'd be letting yourself in for. It's who and what you are and who and what I am that's gripping me. You, Cleo Marston, Curtis Marston's daughter, 19 years old. You think you've been places and done things. You haven't. You haven't seen or done anything. You don't know what it's all about. And who am I to love a girl like you? A homeless space hound who hasn't been on any planet 3 weeks in 3 years. A hard-boiled egg. A troubleshooter and a brawler by instinct and training. He bit off the word and went on quickly. "Why, you don't know me at all, and there's a lot of me that you never will know, that I can't let you know. You'd better lay off me, girl, while you can. It'll be best for you, believe me." "But I can't, Conway, and neither can you," the girl answered softly, a glorious light in her eyes. "It's too late for that. On the ship it was just another of those things, but since then we've come really to know each other, and we're sunk. The situation is out of control, and we both know it. And neither of us would change it if we could, and you know that too. I don't know very much, I admit, but I do know what you thought you'd have to keep from me, and I admire you all the more for it. We all honor the service, Conway, dearest. It is only you men who have made and are keeping the 3 planets fit places to live in, and I know that any one of Virgil Sam's assistants would have to be a man in 1,000 million. "What makes you think that?" he demanded sharply. "You told me so yourself, indirectly. Who else in the 3 worlds could possibly call him Sammy? You are hard, of course, but you must be so, and I never did like soft men anyway. And you brawl in a good cause. You are very much a man, my Conway, a real man, and I love you. Now if they catch us, all right, we'll die together at least," she finished intensely. "You're right, sweetheart, of course," he admitted. "I don't believe that I could really let you let me go, even though I know you ought to." And their hands locked together even more firmly than before. "If we ever get out of this jam, I'm going to kiss you, but this is no time to be taking off your helmet. In fact, I'm taking too many chances with you in keeping your shields off. Snap 'em on again. They ought to be getting fairly close by this time." Hands released and armor again tight, Costigan went over to join Bradley at the control board. "How are they coming, Captain?" he asked. "Not so good. Quite a ways off yet. At least an hour, I'd say, before a cruiser can get within range. I'll see if I can locate any of the pirates chasing us. If I do, it'll be by accident. This little spy ray isn't good for much except close work. I'm afraid the first warning we'll have will be when they take hold of us with a tractor or spear us with a needle. Probably a beam, though. This is one of their emergency lifeboats, and they wouldn't want to destroy it unless they have to. Also, I imagine that Roger wants us alive pretty badly. He has unfinished business with all 3 of us, and I can well believe that his not particularly pleasant extinction will be even less so after the way we rooked him. I want you to do me a favor, Conway." Cleo's face was white with horror at the thought of facing again that unspeakable creature of gray. "Give me a gun or something, please. I don't want him ever to look at me that way again, to say nothing of what else he might do while I'm alive." "He won't," Costigan assured her, narrow of eye and grim of jaw. He was, as she had said, hard. "But you don't want a gun. You might get nervous and use it too soon. I'll take care of you at the last possible moment, because if he gets hold of us, we won't stand a chance of getting away again." For minutes there was silence, Costigan surveying the ether in all directions with his ultra-wave device. Suddenly he laughed, and the others stared at him in surprise. "No, I'm not crazy," he told them. "This is really funny. It had never occurred to me that the ether walls of all these ships make them invisible. I can see them, of course, with this sub-ether spy, but they can't see us. I knew that they should have overtaken us before this. I've finally found them. They passed us and are now tacking around, waiting for us to do something so that they can see us. They're heading right into the fleet. They think they're safe, of course, but what a surprise they've got coming to them." But it was not only the pirates who were to be surprised. Long before the pirate ship had come within extreme visibility range of the Triplanetary fleet, it lost its invisibility and was starkly outlined upon the lookout plates of the three fugitives. For a few seconds the pirate craft seemed unchanged. Then it began to glow redly, with a red that seemed to become darker as it grew stronger. Then the sharp outlines blurred, puffs of air burst outward, and the metal of the hull became a viscous fluid-like something flowing away in a long red streamer into seemingly empty space. Costigan turned his ultra-gaze into that space and saw that it was actually far from empty. There lay a vast something, formless and indefinite even to his subethereal vision, a something into which the viscid stream of transformed metal plunged and vanished. Powerful interference blanketed his ultra-wave and howled throughout his body, but in the hope that some parts of his message might get through, he called Sam's, and calmly and clearly he narrated everything that had just happened. He continued his crisp report, neglecting not the smallest detail, while their tiny craft was drawn inexorably toward a redly impermeable veil. Continued it until their lifeboat, still intact, shot through that veil, and he found himself unable to move. He was conscious. He was breathing normally. His heart was beating, but not a voluntary muscle would obey his will. End of Chapter 8.